Chapter 1400 to 1425. Supremacy Games. As the echoes of the blast gradually faded, all eyes were locked on the nonchalant figure that was Felix. For a moment, the audience seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, the spectacle they had witnessed leaving them momentarily paralyzed. The VIP section, usually abuzz with chatter and laughter, was pin-drop silent. The silence was finally broken by a gasp from the crowd as the reality of what had happened set in. What the hell was that? Did he use telekinesis to blow them up? It can't be. What kind of imaginary power enables him to pull this off? Murmurs began to ripple through the audience like a wave, growing louder with each passing second. The word perfect could be heard whispered in disbelief, echoing throughout the Colosseum. While it seemed easy to pull off such a feat, everyone knew that it shouldn't be possible for anyone besides known veterans. After all, many targets were extremely difficult to pinpoint their position and they were immune to telekinesis, making it impossible to stop them. In the VIP section, Boss Alves and his peers who had been leisurely sipping their drinks choked on their beverages, their eyes riveted on the disintegrating targets. Staring at the departing figure of Felix, they could hardly believe what they had seen. Disbelief and shock were etched on their faces as they frantically tried to comprehend the scale of Felix's performance. A hushed whisper broke the stunned silence of the VIP section. That was, Lady Iris stumbled, unable to find the right words. Incredible. Boss Gideon completed the sentence, his eyes still locked onto Felix's retreating figure. Alves, are you sure he isn't a veteran from a faraway city who moved here? Madame Arabella asked. I don't know. Boss Alves narrowed his eyes. If it wasn't for Felix's association with Elder Kraken, he would have believed just like the others that Felix must have come from a different city. But it was known that ethereal elders pick their servants from the capital alone, which pushed many spirits to move into the capital and hope to hit the jackpot during their recruitment competitions. Still, he wasn't completely confident about his theory since he didn't find any information about Felix's existence in any of those competitions. This meant that he was either recruited directly from the shadows or he just came recently to the heavenly plane and was picked up straight away by Elder Kraken. Whatever it was, Boss Alves was beginning to find himself uncomfortable being in this conflict. Don't *SSY out too soon, he just passed the accuracy test. There are still 3 more tests and there is no way he is going to pass them. Boss Alves pushed down his emotions and hardened his expression, reminding himself of the bullshit Felix pulled against his organization. Whoa, Master is so strong. No wonder he was that confident. Meanwhile, Kura and Sekiro were left even more stunned than everyone else. Because of Felix's eccentrics and clear lack of knowledge about the heavenly plane, they had a strong belief that he was a new spirit. Yet, here he was, giving everyone a spectacle no one expected. Move to the side, Goliath ordered with a tint of irritation in his voice, not pleased in the slightest with Felix's passing. Felix did as he was told and waited for the next round of the trial to begin. It didn't take long before those other 2 fighters got eliminated like the rest, leaving him all alone. This created a weird scene as all the other groups had a sizable chunk of fighters in the second round while he was face to face with the supervisor. Next trial is a telekinesis test. You will have to obtain a perfect score in all presented challenges to pass it. Goliath said, not bothering to explain in detail. Fortunately, Felix came prepared as the information obtained by Kura had everything related to the trials in it. Start. Goliath's gaze hardened as he gestured for the telekinesis test to commence. The crowd watched with bated breath as Felix was suddenly surrounded by a flurry of objects, sharp discs, weighted spheres, and jagged stones, each suspended mid-air and primed to attack. There were hundreds of them, which sent shivers down each fighter's spine. He is so doomed. Sigh, even a veteran's telekinesis barrier will cave in against this barrage. Getting blacklisted is really a death sentence. On Goliath's signal, the projectiles began their assault, flying toward Felix from every direction. Whoosh! 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 Everyone anticipated that Felix would pop out his telekinesis barrier and defend himself, but instead, he simply moved, evading the speeding projectiles like he was never in their target. Whether it was Goliath, the city's upper echelon, the fighters, or the viewers, every one of them was left petrified, charmed by his movement akin to a snake getting hypnotized by a snake's charmer. Their reaction was understandable as Felix's movements were fluid like water flowing around stones. There was an uncanny grace in the way he sidestepped a spear, ducked under a flying disc, and somersaulted over a group of arrows. His every movement was in balance with his environment, creating a dance of evasion that left the crowd in awe. His eyes were the primary guide, predicting the trajectory of each projectile with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. One moment, he would be standing straight, the next, he would be bending backward, the projectiles missing him by a hair's breadth. At times, he would slide under the projectiles, his body nearly parallel to the ground. And at other times, he would leap into the air, twisting and turning to avoid the barrage of attacks. I think you should take a look at. His rhythm never faltered, even when the pace quickened. Hoa! Hoa! When the viewers finally couldn't hold it in, they burst into thunderous excited cheers with each successful evasion. I can't believe this, the trial is meant to test the hardness of the telekinesis barrier, yet he hasn't materialized even one. Lady Iris covered her mouth in shock, sharing the same reaction as her peers. This. Only Boss Alves seemed to have taken it much harder as with each successful dodge, his instinct screamed at him to stay the F***ck out of Felix's path as he was no ordinary individual. To pull this off, one has to be either super talented in fighting and his entire personality was oriented towards this, or his battle experience is simply too godly. Boss Gideon commentated as he watched Felix land lightly on his feet without a single scratch on his body, the ground around him filled with a mountain of deadly weapons. Felix dusted his clothes nonchalantly and lifted his head up, staring at his end result on the screen. The Traveler, 0% damage. Perfect score. The condition to pass the test wasn't to use the telekinesis shield but to receive the lowest percentage of damage possible. For those fighters, the only possible way was through using their trusted barriers instead of copying Felix's method. The moment Felix read the score, he lowered his gaze a bit and eyed Goliath, whose expression seemed a bit pale like he had seen an alive person. What's next? Felix called, his voice as steady as always. Telekinesis control, you need to score 1000 points in less than a minute to pass. Goliath uttered coldly. Boo! Boo! This didn't please the crowd one bit as they started to feel a sense of admiration and appreciation for Felix, who was going against such biased trials and still acing them. Alas, Goliath couldn't give a shit as he was paid with the rest of the supervisors handsomely to get rid of Felix, and if he failed to make it happen, there would be severe consequences. This time, several floating platforms were brought out, each sporting multiple hoops of different sizes that moved erratically in a three-dimensional space. While Felix wasn't given an explanation to make the test harder, he knew that he needed to manipulate an array of objects, spheres, cubes, and other complex shapes with telekinesis and aim them into their rightful moving hoops. The difficulty lay not just in the movement of the targets, but in the skill required to handle the different shapes and sizes, in addition to the mental energy consumption. Felix didn't use the telekinesis barrier before because he knew that his spiritual prowess wasn't in a comfortable spot yet to succeed in both tests in a perfect fashion. Now, he had to use his telekinesis control as no other method was allowed to move those objects. Start! Felix took a deep breath and extended his hand. Instantly, one of the spheres rose from the ground and hung suspended in the air. His eyes narrowed as he watched the movement of the hoops. He moved his fingers subtly, and the sphere shot forward, adjusting its path in midair to perfectly fit into a hoop that was just about to move. Cling! 10 points rewarded. The crowd broke into applause, but Felix was merely warming up. Arise! He jerked his finger to the sky and more than 100 objects flew into the sky and hovered around him akin to planets circling a star. Before anyone could react, he launched them into the moving hoops. The objects moved fluidly through the air, swerving and adjusting their paths according to the hoop's movement, and landed perfectly into their targets. Ting! 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 The onlookers were left absolutely speechless as they could only stare with widened eyes at the sight of hundreds of differently shaped objects fitting perfectly into their hoops, causing the screen to keep ringing non-stop and his score to increase explosively. 200 points, 300 points, 500 points, 1000 points. 1500 points. While Felix was given 1 minute to finish the test, he ended up putting all of the objects in their rightful hoops in less than 5 seconds, demonstrating an mysterious level of accuracy and control. As the test concluded, Felix let his hand fall to his side, a look of calm satisfaction on his face, but deep inside, he was running on fumes as his mental energy was on the verge of exhaustion. Fortunately, the telekinesis trial had only those 2 challenges and he had passed them with flying colors. What's next? He called yet again, causing Goliath to feel a sense of dread looming on his shoulders. *T, I only have 1 more trial. What do I need to do to get rid of this monster? Goliath and the rest of the supervisors started to sweat at the notion of Felix actually passing through the special package. They were paid too handsomely to afford to fail at their mission. Goliath, stop messing around and invoke the personal challenge trial. One of the supervisors stressed. It's too shameful. Goliath frowned, my reputation will take a massive hit. Do we look like we can afford to care about your reputation? If the special package failed, we won't be able to justify our exorbitant prices and they will hit rock bottom. Since the supervisors were considered as working under the direct government, they had a bit of authority under their names. So, they didn't really fear the Red Fangs ruining their lives by blacklisting them or such. However, they knew that such failure would ruin their entire operation for good. Fine. Although he wasn't pleased, Goliath knew that he couldn't afford to let Felix pass the trial even if it meant putting his reputation on the line. Your next and last trial is me. Goliath gave Felix a cold stare before suddenly dropping to the ground, towering over him. He wasn't named Goliath for no reason, as he was a towering hulk of 3 meters with grey iron skin, shimmering with intense red light. To pass the trials and earn your spot in the tournament, you have to land 3 direct attacks on me. Goliath smirked coldly as he had gotten into his battle position. There is no time limit. Boo-hoo! Boo-hoo! The spectators went absolutely wild with boos and negative remarks as they felt like Goliath was making it way too obvious now that he wanted to eliminate Felix. All of them were smart enough to realize that Felix must be banned to receive such treatment, and they didn't like it one bit. After all, as citizens, all of them were subjected to the same tyranny from the city lords, and they were forced to keep their heads lowered against them to avoid getting blacklisted. Alas, if only booing could solve anything. Are you ready? Goliath asked, his eyes affixed on Felix. Felix didn't bother to reply as he maintained his indifferent posture like he wasn't intimidated even slightly by Goliath. It was understandable as his giant size was nothing to Felix, who fought against beings the size of celestial objects. But his reaction wasn't to Goliath's pleasure, as it made him feel like he was being underestimated. I was planning to show you a bit of mercy, but now. Goliath growled in his mind, I will beat you up until you will beg me to stop. Whoosh! Goliath was the first to move, his body blurring as he summoned a gust of wind to propel himself forward. His speed was astounding, bolstered by his control over the wind. But Felix remained unmoved, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the incoming attack. Just as Goliath was about to strike, Felix snapped his fingers. A subtle vibration rippled outwards, subtly altering the air around him. Goliath's punch, guided by the wind, suddenly veered off course, missing Felix by a hair's breadth. Hey! Taking advantage of Goliath's momentary confusion, Felix stepped forward and snapped his fingers once again, sending a thunderous concentrated wave of vibration directly toward Goliath. Boom! It was too sudden for the wind spirit to dodge, and the vibrational force connected, sending Goliath stumbling back with a loud explosion. One hit. Thud. 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 As the viewers watched Goliath rolling into the ground uncontrollably, their buoys came to a sudden halt. Even though Felix had shown his capabilities in the tests, they were still confident that Goliath would teach Felix a lesson, as he was one of the most infamous runner-ups in those tournaments. His legacy ended when he was unsuccessful to become a champion 5 times in a row, and he retired from the fighting scene and settled down as a supervisor, attempting to seek a career in the government. Yet, here he was, lying on the ground with a similar stunned expression as the viewers. What happened? Was that sound element abilities? It can't be, I heard nothing, just pure silent vibrations turning into a weird explosion. Goliath's mind was in shambles. He didn't erect a telekinesis barrier, believing that his assault would force Felix into defense or at least evade, but to retaliation, and so damn efficiently. He didn't anticipate it at all. Still, not one to be deterred, Goliath got himself back on foot with a stern expression, telling everyone that he wasn't going to fall for the same attack again. Whoosh! Without an ounce of hesitation, he summoned a wind vortex around his fists and legs, then he charged once again with an unprecedented speed. This time, his body was protected with a tough telekinesis barrier, gleaming under the sunlight akin to glass armor. Felix remained calm and stretched out his arms. The arena pulsated, responding to his silent command. An almost inaudible hum filled the air, and vibrations began to ripple out from him, distorting the air around him and creating a visible aura of pulsating energy. As Goliath launched himself forward, using the gale force winds to increase his speed, Felix sent the vibrations forward, transforming the space around him into a wild, chaotic sea of invisible, energetic waves. If it wasn't because of his simple understanding of vibration and lack of training, he could have done more than this. Still, even when he was merely touching the surface of the vibration element, Goliath suddenly found his flight path turned erratic, as if he was being jostled by an unseen force. I think you should take a look at it. His telekinesis barrier flickered, struggling to protect him from the turbulent energy. As a wind specialist, his situation was much worse due to the vibration and sound element being a tough counter. He couldn't even control the wind in the vibration field due to it being absolutely dominated by vibrations. The onlookers watched, spellbound, as the mighty Goliath was knocked around like a puppet caught in an invisible storm. Crack! Crack! What's worse, his barrier was visibly cracking under the relentless assault of Felix's vibrations, which made him even more shocked. How? His telekinesis barrier was one of his most trusted assets and had gotten him through too many troubles. Yet, here it was, breaking at an uncanny speed like it was being assaulted by a sledgehammer. Unbeknownst to him, the vibrations weren't just hitting his barrier in a random manner, but a unique set of frequencies controlled by Felix. Just like he did with the flame on his palm, Felix had found the right frequency of Goliath's telekinesis barrier and started messing with it through the vibrations. The results? With each hit, the cracks spread, spider-webbing across the barrier until, with a sound like shattering glass, it splintered completely. Impossible! Goliath was left defenseless in the chaotic sea of vibrations, his confident demeanor replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. Before he could regain control over his emotions, Felix clapped his hands twice, and 2 concentrated vibrations waves were launched at him. Boredom! Boredom! The vibrations hit their mark, striking Goliath squarely in the chest and hurling him further and further into the depth of the arena. 2 more hits. Felix lowered his arms and the vibrations subsided, leaving the arena in a stunned silence. 3 hits registered. Congratulations to the traveler for passing the trials successfully. Even when it seemed like Goliath had much more to offer, too bad for him, the battle was over the moment the condition was fulfilled. Whoa-ah! Whoa-ah! The viewers imploded into frenzied cheering with flushed cheeks and fists in the air at this magnificent F***CKU to the city lords. A blacklisted fighter went against the odds and emerged not just victorious, but in the most extraordinary manner. While they were screaming at the top of their lungs, a stunned silence hung heavy in the air within the VIP section. The rich, influential sponsors had just witnessed a trial that had far surpassed their expectations. They had come to scout capability fighters, not expecting to see one of the best possible trials from a banned fighter. Impressive, Lady Iris breathed, a slow smile spreading across her face. Truly impressive. This spirit, he holds capability far greater than we anticipated. His control, his creativity, it's rare. He has the instincts of a seasoned fighter. He didn't just defeat Goliath, he made him look like a novice. Boss Gideon nodded. Goliath wasn't clearly in his greatest form, as he didn't even use his other two elements. But, praise when praise is due. This man is going to create waves in this tournament. Mr. Atticus said, his tone as indifferent as ever, but his eyes had a gleam of interest in them. This look was shared by the majority of the sponsors, which made Boss Alves' expression turn bad. Those F***ers are thinking of sponsoring him. He knew immediately that none of them were going to respect the blacklist order and miss out on such a once-in-an-era talent. They had no problems with respecting the blacklist order if the spirit used on it was useless and non-important like Kara. But with everything that Felix showed? Some of them were already dreaming of becoming the winner of the Heavenly Plane tournament. Boss Alves, cough, can we ask what made you blacklist the traveler? Hehe, if it wasn't something too serious, I believe we can fix it through an apology or a payment. Boss Gideon was the first to launch the attack on Boss Alves, letting him know that his eyes were on Felix and he merely showed him due respect with a fair warning. I think so too, this fighter oozes talent and I believe we can bring the Heavenly Plane trophy home at last with him representing us. Madame Arabella supported, seemingly forgetting entirely about her prepared fighters. I don't care if you sponsor him, just know that you will be getting yourselves involved in a conflict far above your league. Without giving any more details, Boss Alves walked away, leaving them staring at his back with puzzled looks. They didn't know if he uttered this to convince them to drop Felix or if he was truly a laced treasure with venom, and if they dared to touch him, it wouldn't end well. Whatever it was, at this moment, none of them seemed to have any thought of giving up on Felix. While Felix was being cheered at by the audience as he was walking away from the arena, two sets of bewitching eyes were affixed on him. In the solitude of her room within the ethereal palace, Asna stood before a projection that mirrored the events of the Colosseum. It showcased Felix's trials in vivid detail, allowing her to be there in spirit if not body. As Felix overcame each trial, a complex set of emotions played out in her vibrant eyes. Initially, there was confusion, as she neither recognized Felix's appearance nor his personality, both were vastly different than his previous life. However, the moment she looked at his eyes, she recognized him immediately, as the eyes could never lie. Then, a sense of relief washed over her, followed by a strange amalgamation of pride, sadness, and longing. But as he emerged victorious against Goliath, her heart lapsed. This was a Felix she had never known, his countenance cold, his movements ruthless, his spirit devoid of the warmth and kindness she remembered. He was like a robot in the form of a spirit with nothing but eyes and the battle experience of her beloved. What happened to you? She muttered, her hand reaching out to the projection, touching Felix's expressionless visage. He was no longer the Felix she knew and loved. The bitterness of this reality stung like a fresh wound, reopening the scars she had tried so hard to heal. Did he already forget me? Did he already give up on me? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she did not blink them away. They traced hot paths down her cheeks at the thought of Felix losing all of his emotions for her. In a sense, this was exactly what she wanted, so Felix wouldn't associate himself with her anymore or her celestial troubles, but it didn't mean her heart wouldn't ache deeply at the mere thought. Despite the pain and the heartache, she was still there for him, watching, supporting, and hoping. Even from afar, she couldn't help but be drawn to him. As long as he is safe and well, I am happy, I am happy. In her heart, she whispered a soft prayer, a plea to the universe. For his safety, his success, and above all, his happiness. Because despite everything, she still loved him. And she always would. On the other side, this troublemaker, I knew he will straight out pick up the tournaments as a way to gain Loomis, but sigh. Elder Kraken smiled wryly as he shut down the stream. Lord Hades told him to distance himself from Felix, but he had no intentions of leaving Felix out of his sight as he knew what kind of trouble he was capable of. His assumption was rightfully so with everything that happened to Felix on day one. At least, he didn't use any of his previous elements. Elder Kraken nodded. Even if Lord Hades or the elders had any suspicious of him, they would be more likely to believe that he has won the jackpot in the memories reformation and gotten an extraordinary talent for a warrior. It was a known fact that only golden newcomer spirits were allowed to choose their personalities, talents, and any modification they desired to help them in their stay. Red spirits and below receive randomized personalities, memories, and traits. Some win the jackpot and receive memories and traits that could be translated to legit monstrous talents while the majority receive basic personalities. Elder Kraken used this advantage to keep his personality similar to his old one. If it wasn't for him, Felix would have been a truly different person entirely. Well, he knows how to get himself out of trouble. Elder Kraken waved his hand carelessly and returned to his own issues, trusting that Felix was capable of taking care of himself. If he knew what he was doing at the moment, he would have reduced his trust a couple of notches. I think you should take a look at. Felix and his two servants were seen sitting at the nearest restaurant after they were intercepted by one of the sponsor's servants and taken there. Sir, your astounding performance must have captured the eyes of the sponsors. Sekiro spoke with a hushed tone. I have a strong feeling that the block list order can be taken care of today if we get ourselves under one of the sponsors' umbrella. Felix gave an acknowledgement noise, seemingly disinterested. His reaction didn't put Sekiro's heart at ease, but he learned by now to not question Felix's judgment or motives. So, he remained quiet like Kura and waited for the sponsor to join them. To their absolute shock, the sponsor didn't just come in less than a couple of minutes, he brought with him two of his peers, causing all the customers to get frozen at their tables. Is that Lady Iris? Skyglide Transportation Company's CEO. A customer murmured, his widened eyes attached on Lady Iris like he met a celebrity. It wasn't far-fetched to call her a celebrity as she was a key player in the transportation industry with her infamous company. Skyglide Transportation Company was responsible for providing advanced, efficient, and comfortable public transportation services across the heavenly plane. Though the prices were exorbitant, making everyone feel the pinch each time they take transportation ways. Still, the majority of the customers' eyes were on Boss Gideon and Madame Arabella. I have lived in the city for more than a millennia and this is the first time I see Madame Arabella, she is as rare as a spectral unicorn. Another customer commented, his eyes never leaving Madame Arabella. His reaction was understandable as Madame Arabella's name dominated the food and restaurant industry in the entire plane with her company, Nebula Foods. Nebula Foods owned a chain of high-quality eateries and cafes spread across the plane and were also known for being the best supplier of exotic spirit realm delicacies. In fact, this restaurant belonged to her and she was the one making the first initial contact with Felix. As for Boss Gideon, he was just as important and famous as his peers. His company was called Etheric Visions Entertainment and it was one of the biggest players in the entertainment industry. In fact, his company was so powerful, it possessed a significant share of the streaming revenue of the yearly tournaments across the heavenly plane. Now, all of those heavy swingers were standing in front of a single table. Before the patrons could even question Felix's identity, Madame Arabella snapped her finger, and the entire restaurant staff came out to kick off the customers politely, refunding their money and even packing their food to take with them. Even though the treatment wasn't to their comfort, no one would have dared even if their money wasn't refunded. The blacklist order was simply a death sentence and everyone avoided it akin to a plague. So, the restaurant was emptied and closed down in a few seconds, causing Kura to gulp a mouthful in fear and hide behind Felix. Greetings, Sir Traveler, I am Iris Singh Arya. Do I have the pleasure of knowing your real name? Lady Iris introduced with a charming smile. I go by the Traveler. Felix replied expressionlessly, coming off a bit impolite and cold. His response wasn't to the sponsor's pleasure as it made him seem arrogant and disrespectful, but they kept their displeasure to themselves. I see, looks like you aren't of the type to like beating around the bush, so I will be straightforward. Lady Iris offered, me and my associates are curious in sponsoring you in this tournament and we are willing to do more than just pay for your entrance fee. Sekiro and Kara's faces lit up immediately as they knew that their days of being blacklisted were short-lived. Alas! I have enough to pay for myself, so I refuse your offer. Felix stood up and asked calmly, is that all? Here we go. Sekiro stood up after him, his head lowered under his hat, and sighed his frustration away, feeling like an idiot for expecting a different result. Lady Iris looked at Felix, disbelief etched across her face. She was not accustomed to being turned down. There was a moment of stunned silence before Madame Arabella broke it, her voice quite enticing. What if I told you we can remove the blacklist order on you and provide resources you could only dream of? What do I have to give in return? Felix asked, giving them a chance. In his eyes, if he could get rid of this irritating blacklist order from his back and also receive the support of the big lords in the city, why not? As long as the payment was something he could live with. I speak for myself when I say that I want you to win the tournament or at least qualify for the Heavenly Plains tournament. Lady Iris shared, this is the minimum requirement. If you managed to win this tournament, I will be getting 40% of the winnings in addition to having you promote my company's name and products in each opportunity presented to you. Felix shook his head and looked at the other two, seemingly leading them to propose their counter-offers. 20% of the winnings, but a 10 years ambassador contract to my company. Boss Gideon said. 35% of the winnings, but a 10-year-long committed partnership in all tournaments. Madame Arabella offered. All of those offers might sound a bit too steep or harsh, but Sekiro wanted nothing more but for Felix to bite on any one of them. After all, his master would be getting the support of an authoritative figure in the city, which ensured that he wouldn't get blacklisted again. The payments were nothing in comparison to the rewards. Alas, Felix wasn't interested in such a low-quality subordinate partnership, especially when he was confident in his capabilities to break new heights in the tournaments. The end rewards could reach up to 500,000 Loomis, and that was an amount even those rich lords would salivate for. This is my one and only counter-offer, the first to take it will be considered as my partner not sponsor. Before those executives could react, Felix disclosed, in terms of earnings, you will get 50% from this tournament and 20% from the Heavenly Plains tournament. This is non-negotiable. In addition, you will invest at least 100,000 Loomis of resources to help me boost my spiritual prowess. I will act as the ambassador for your products, but I will get paid at least 5% of the profit in case of the sales increase due to me. Last but not least, this deal would end the moment I get accepted into a governmental position. Felix concluded, those are my terms. As Felix concluded his counter-offer, the room fell into a tense silence. The representatives of Australia's leading companies, once smug and confident, were now thrown off balance, their expressions ranging from surprise to mild annoyance. I must say, this is a first, commented Boss Gideon, his lips curling into a mirthless smile. His eyes, however, were sharp and assessing as they bore into Felix. Lady Iris exchanged a quick glance with Madame Arabella, who responded with a slight shake of her head, clearly disapproving of the turn of events. There's a reason we don't usually do things this way, retorted Lady Iris, her voice containing an edge that wasn't present earlier. We provide the sponsorship, you fight and bring in the Loomis. But your situation is much more exceptional as you are a blacklisted fighter, and representing you means going against the Red Fang's wishes. We are doing you a massive favor by just giving you an opportunity considering your dire situation. Felix merely nodded, not backing down. I understand, but my conditions stand. There was a murmur of discontentment among the sponsors, their displeasure evident. They were not used to such terms being dictated by the fighters, it was always the other way around. Felix watched them, unfazed by their collective annoyance. He knew what he was worth, and he was not going to let anyone underestimate him. As for the blacklist order, while it was annoying, he had many plans to go around it. Just as Lady Iris tried to change his mind, a sharp, discordant chime of a communicator was heard in the restaurant. Lady Iris reached into the pocket of her elaborate gown, retrieving a slim, glowing device, resembling an ancient smartphone but made out of crystals. A holographic message unfolded in the air, casting shifting shadows across her face. As she read through, her emerald eyes widened in surprise, and then deep concern. "Read this," she murmured, projecting the message to her peers. The news detailed how Kara had been blacklisted, tied to an influential noble, and the initial reason for Felix's run-in with Red Fangs. As the implications became clearer, a deep hush enveloped the room. The powerful people who controlled vast aspects of Australia's economy felt the weight of their vulnerability in the face of nobility, especially when they knew the name of the noble. Boss Gideon, who had been previously in a relaxed posture, stiffened. "This is not just a simple blacklist. This is a message. If we align ourselves with this spirit, we will be putting ourselves in deep trouble." Madame Arabella's face turned a shade paler. "That bastard Alves kept such information to himself, wanting to set us up. I don't think he thought that far, he probably just pissed about us not respecting his blacklist order and wanted to punish us." Lady Iris sighed, closing the holographic message, her usual calm composure broken. There was a pause, the gravity of the situation dawning upon them all. They had entered this restaurant, expecting to sign a rising star, a potential gold mine. But now, the risks associated with Felix were too great, the danger of retaliation from an ethereal elder was a cost none were willing to pay. Felix, sensing the shift in the restaurant, realized he had lost any prospective alliance he might have hoped to gain from this meeting. The sponsors, once eager to sign him, were now eager to distance themselves. As expected. Honestly, he wasn't surprised in the slightest, as he expected as much. A noble's authority was simply above all in the heavenly plane. Without another word, Lady Iris and her peers turned around and left the restaurant, not bothering to interact with Felix for another second, fearing that the Duke's wrath would befall them. "Well, at least we didn't make any new enemies." Sekiro chuckled in derision, finding some positivity from their situation. "I would rather have them leave now than sign us and separate us when they find out," Felix replied, sipping from a cup of tea without an ounce of bother in his tone. He was a contract expert and knew that those companies would put a clause to keep him imprisoned contractually if things went south. In other words, he wouldn't be able to do much, but at the same time, he wouldn't lose much. In the case of Felix, he would be losing an entire decade of his time here, which was unacceptable. "You better eat, we will be leaving in the streets for a while and I doubt any restaurant will serve us again," Felix uttered casually as he began feasting on the dishes before him. "How can you even eat in such situation?" Sekiro rubbed his eyelids to ease his wariness and started eating too. Meanwhile, Kara operated based on orders from Felix, and the moment he uttered to eat, she started eating without a single complaint. While the three black homeless sheep were feasting on their last meal at such a nice place, they had no clue that two pairs of golden eyes were watching them carefully from the window. "Calculating, intelligent, fearless, and has plenty of room for development, I guess I finally found a worthy assistant to my agency, kiki. Felix had a peculiar sensation that felt like prickling needles at the back of his neck, a shivering echo of being observed. He was too familiar with it. He paused, his every instinct on edge as he swiveled around to face the window. His eyes scanned the area, focusing on the edges of his view, but there was nothing, no one, there. Were my senses wrong? His gaze lingered on the seemingly innocuous scene before him, but finally, he turned back, shrugging off the fleeting feeling as nothing more than an overactive imagination. The moment he had dismissed his suspicions and continued eating, a shadow detached itself from the deep corners of a narrow alley. The figure was slender and moved with a fluid grace that echoed the movements of a feline. A set of cat ears perked up from beneath the hood of her cloak, swiveling attentively. Kikiki, as expected, his senses are quite sharp. But, let's see how he fares first in the tournament. The cloaked female lingered for a moment more before slipping back into the depths of the alley, a wide grin edged on her hidden face, exposing two gleaming fangs. 1 week later. Life took an unexpected turn for Felix and his servants. The bustling city of Astralis, its neon lights and crystalline structures, was replaced by the calming tranquility of the National Garden. For a little over a week, they made their home in a small tent, surrounded by an array of colorful flora and ethereal wildlife. During the day, the garden shimmered with vibrant colors, the sunlight diffusing through the foliage and casting patterns of light and shadow on the emerald grass. At night, bioluminescent plants and insects would light up the landscape, an eerie yet enchanting spectacle that captivated them all. Felix and Sekiro spent their days searching for a new place to stay, approaching each apartment complex and renter they came across. But time and time again, they were met with locked doors and dismissive glances, their pleas drowned by the invisible wall erected by his blacklist order. Felix was placing his hopes before on staying in one of Elder Kraken's apartment districts, but it turned out that using his name on his servants brought him more trouble. That's because Elder Kraken didn't dare tell his servants to give Felix a break, as he knew that Lord Hade's orders must be taken like royal verdicts. If he dared assist Felix in the shadows, whether directly or indirectly, he knew that it wouldn't end well for him. If Felix was any random spirit, Lord Hades wouldn't have cared less, but the fact that his existence was linked to Asna made him a target. Despite the looming sense of isolation and countless rejections, Felix bought a tent and settled down in the National Garden with the rest of the homeless spirits. Right now, he was training in silence under a serene tree while Kara and Sekiro were watching him from a distance. "You think his plan will work?" Kara asked softly. "Well, whether it works or not, it's not like we have any other alternative." Sekiro smiled wryly. When Felix realized that it was a mere waste of time to seek out a home while blacklisted, he dropped the thought and came up with a different strategy. It was simple really: acquire enough Lumis to build his own small house in the suburb of the city. Each spirit had the right to build a single house with a mere permit from the government, and no one could take this right away from them. Though, building a house whether small or big was extremely expensive, and almost 90% of spirits never use this one-time permit. "Our hopes on him winning the tournament if we don't want to live in the streets forever." Sekiro could only wish Felix the best of luck. As for the thought of leaving Felix behind after a year, it wasn't an option unless Felix couldn't afford to pay his monthly salary. While servants had laws and rights, resembling workers, they were still called servants for a reason. The only way for them to be dropped was through either the owner releasing them or one of the conditions in the contract wasn't fulfilled. Until then, the servants must be loyal to their master for eternity. Days went by, and before long, the day of the spectral tournament arrived, brimming with a raw energy that filled the air. Hundreds of fighters of all shapes and sizes stood in the Colosseum's grand arena, their varied colors blending into a kaleidoscope of vibrant hues. Felix couldn't be seen, but he was amidst them. An excited murmur flowed through the crowd, anticipation palpable as they awaited the start of the mayhem. As the murmurs gradually gave way to a sea of silence, a tall, silver-skinned figure ascended the stage. Dressed in an emerald tunic and with silver hair falling in waves over his broad shoulders, Mr. Sagrus, the beloved host of the annual tournament, carried an air of calm charisma. His captivating presence had everyone's attention locked onto him, hanging on to his every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, spirits of Astralis," he began, his voice resonating across the vast arena. "We are gathered here for the most exhilarating event of the year, the Grand Spectral Tournament. I, Sagrus, am honored to be your host once more." As Mr. Sagrus wrapped up his introduction, an energetic hush fell over the audience. Suddenly, the colossal screen at the center of the arena flickered, and a series of lines began to divide the hundreds of fighters into 4 distinct groups. A deep boom echoed throughout the Colosseum as Sagras announced, "Now, for the initial stage of our tournament, the Battle Royale. Each group will engage in a massive brawl, with the aim to be among the last 4 standing in their respective groups." With a grand gesture of his hand, a series of barriers lit up, separating the groups from each other. Each barrier pulsated with vibrant hues corresponding to the colors of the groups: cobalt blue, fiery red, luminous yellow, and deep emerald green. The fighters within each barrier eyed each other, tension simmering as they sized up their competition. "Roll the dice!" Mr. Sagras shouted as he eyed a massive holographic dice with all of its facets having only 1 to 4 numbers, rolled on the ground. After a couple of spins, the dice stopped at number 3. Group 3. Prepare yourselves. As the last syllable of Sagras's announcement faded, the barriers around groups 1, 2, and 4 flickered and vanished, freeing the fighters within. His voice, magnified to reverberate around the entire Colosseum, instructed, "Groups 1, 2, and 4, you may now vacate the arena. Your battles will commence shortly." Within seconds, the arena was cleared, leaving only the luminous yellow barrier of Group 3 shimmering. 100 fighters from various walks of spirit life stood inside the barrier, their auras mixing to create a beautiful spectrum of colors. Felix ended up being among them. He could be seen standing at the edge of the arena with a few fighters holding his sides, giving him solemn looks once in a while. Felix's perfect performance in the trial had gone viral in the city in the past weeks amongst this tournament contestants, making him get put on their radars. While no one showed it, Felix could tell that many fighters seemed to have a personal beef with him as their eyes never left him. "Looks like the Red Fangs are still splurging their money on me," he sneered, his eyes as indifferent as ever. Mr. Sagras raised his hand, quietly descending upon the Colosseum. His voice, filled with anticipation, echoed through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, let the Battle Royale begin." At his command, the last barrier vanished. The tension exploded into motion as fighters lunged at each other, their unique abilities illuminating the Colosseum. Suddenly, a group of 6 spirits separated themselves from the melee. Their forms hardened with the distinctive glow of telekinesis barriers, a shimmering layer that enclosed them like a second skin. Their predatory gazes fell on Felix, and almost immediately, they veered toward him, cutting a path through the chaos. Each one of them had an impressive display of raw power, their bodies illuminated by the swirling energy of their respective abilities. One swirled with a vortex of wind, another's form crackled with electricity, while a third was coated in a layer of frost. "Damn it! Will they ever give it a break?" Sekiro gritted his teeth in anger while Kara showed a worried look at the sight of Felix being rushed at by multiple fighters at the same time. Even the crowd gasped as the group of hired spirits lunged at Felix. But Felix stood his ground, his face as calm as still water. "Show me what you got." The same stalker from that night was seen blended in the crowd, her golden eyes affixed on Felix, refusing to have him leave her sight. Suddenly, Felix turned to stare at her directly while his extended hand in front of him merely closed into a fist. "Hey!" The stalker felt like Felix had detected her intrusive eyes from thousands of other pairs, which was quite difficult to believe even for her. After blinking once, she found out that Felix wasn't looking at her anymore, his indifferent pearls were affixed at his rushing enemies. The instant Felix's hand became a fist, a low rumble began from inside his body and traveled to his feet before going under the ground. Rumble, rumble. The rumbling grew in intensity as it echoed throughout the noisy Colosseum. But, no one heard it and no one felt anything. "The bounty is mine." One of the rushing spirits called a blazing soul manifested a magnificent flaming sword, reaching tens of meters in height, and swung it at Felix from midair the moment he entered his range. *CK off to the side. Another spirit called Stormtrooper with a loud mouth zigzagged rapidly through the chaotic battlefield, relying on his lightning-quick mobility to speed past all his competitors. Then, He hurled a lightning bolt in the shape of a spear in Felix's direction. Before any of those fighters could even worry about losing their bounty, the lightning bolt seemed to have magically vibrated into energy particles the instant it got too close to Felix's comfort zone. How? Stormtrooper was left stunned as his most trusted offensive ability didn't even force Felix to use his telekinesis barrier. Whoosh! The same situation happened to the massive flaming sword. It got cut from the middle the moment it tried to pass through Felix's body, making it seem like those elements were allergic to touching Felix. Was sound element always this powerful? How can vibrations in the air create such a powerful invisible barrier? Sir Sagrus commentated with a startled expression that was shared with the rest of the viewers. Everyone had seen how Felix was capable of blocking Goliath's wind abilities, but the vibration field at that time was apparent and clearly oppressive as hell. But now? No one could see or hear a single ounce of vibration coming out of Felix, making it seem like he had nothing around him. This was the result of Felix's intense training on his vibration abilities. During the trial, he was using vibration too crudely and wasting too much fuel on less performance. But after he optimized his manipulation through trial and error, he could now create an invisible barrier around him that automatically detected the frequencies of elemental energies. Then, match the vibration with the frequency to cancel its creation. It could be said to be the only absolute anti-elemental element, capable of nullifying the creation of any ability. Useless tricks! Roid Rage roared as he charged toward Felix from the ground akin to a furious bull. He did resemble one as he had massive nostrils and two horns while his feet were hoofs. Whoosh! The wind seemed to be his main element as his charge was being boosted by two wind jets attached to his shoulders. A Blazing Soul, Stormtrooper, and the rest of the bounty hunters gave up on a ranged battle and swiftly charged after Roid Rage, knowing that Felix's peculiar barrier could not protect him from melee attacks. They were right in this sense, as Felix's field was strictly anti-elemental at the moment, as he didn't have enough time to master the field completely. But it didn't mean he wasn't prepared for such development. Siasim Shockwave, Erupt! The instant Roid Rage and the rest of the bounty hunters were a mere 10 to 20 meters away from him, Felix slammed his fist onto the ground, causing a shockwave of invisible energy to erupt from beneath him, rippling outwards through the ground. The vibrations coursed through the arena floor like a heart-shattering drumbeat, causing the very foundation of the arena to tremble violently, and in the next instant, it fractured. With an ear-splitting crack, the ground exploded, sending chunks of rocks and debris soaring into the sky like confetti in a violent celebration. The once smooth and polished arena floor was now an uneven, devastated battleground with pits and crevices punctuating the surface. What the hell? Arg! The initial explosion had launched the closest fighters to the source off their feet, their telekinetic barriers failing to withstand the sudden explosive assault. This eruption caused even the sponsors and golden-ranked spectators to be left stunned at its immense destructiveness, thinking that a new fighter's spiritual prowess shouldn't fuel such a powerful attack. They were right in this sense, but they had no idea that Felix had been preparing for this eruption from the start of the battle royal by sending precise vibrations through his feet. What a turn of events! But this isn't enough to reach the hits threshold for each player. Mr. Sungrus yelled excitedly. Since death wasn't an option in the spirit realm, the only way to win such fights was through either reaching a hit threshold, surrendering, or kicking the fighter out of the arena. The hits threshold was a universal 20 in this specific tournament, which meant Felix had to score 20 direct physical hits to eliminate those bounty hunters. Felix knew as much and had prepared his next strike for it. Vibration pulses. With an outstretched hand, he flexed his fingers and then clenched his fist. Suddenly, a concentrated pulse of vibration erupted from him, imbuing the airborne giant rocks and debris with its energy. Whoosh whoosh! They hummed with power, a lethal choir singing their impending doom as they rocketed toward the disoriented and defenseless bounty hunters. Caught off guard, the bounty hunters barely had a chance to react as they were pelted by the barrage of rocks. Their screams were muffled by the noise of the battle, bodies flung and tossed like ragdolls amidst the debris. Some managed to deflect a few rocks, but the majority were hit squarely, the impact sending them crashing out of the arena and into the unforgiving invisible walls of the Colosseum. Hoa! The audience erupted into astonished cheers and stunned gasps at the sight of Felix standing in the midst of the ruined arena, dust and fumes swirling around him. He didn't move an inch from his original spot even when the entire area around him was completely in ruins. His message was clear: he wasn't going to strike anyone, but if someone dared to challenge him, he would face the same fate as the Red Fang's bounty hunters. **T, it feels even worse knowing that we can't have him represent us. Boss Gideon cursed with an irritated voice. He is strong all right, but our fighters aren't to be underestimated. Madame Arabella smiled faintly. Now that he has shown some of his trump cards to nobodies, it will be easier to get rid of him. Since Felix wasn't going to represent either of them, they would rather have him removed from the competition to not steal any of the 3 qualifying spots to the Heavenly Plains tournament. After all, those 3 slots were too precious and they had to fall under their hands to increase their company's reputation and profit. I forgot your new fighter was in the same group as him. I hope he delivers after praising him to the roof before us. Everyone's eyes suddenly switched from Felix to a striking figure right in the center of the arena, floating in the sky with a dominant aura. He was emitting an intense red shine that rippled around him like a vivid aurora. His skin was as dark as night, and it held an uncanny design of red and blue veins, embodying the essence of his elementary powers. His peepers flickered, one with the deep blue of a tempestuous sea, the other with the fervent glow of molten lava. Chained daggers with blood dripping off them hung from his waist, their cold, gleaming edges a stark contrast to the warmth of his form. It looked like Felix's earthquake didn't please him too much as his cold sinister peepers were now affixed on him, ignoring all the contestants around him. I wanted to save you for last, but I guess you aren't that patient, Scalding Winter said coldly while setting one dagger in flames and the other in chilling ice. The tense atmosphere in the Colosseum intensified as everyone could see that Scalding Winter had set his eyes on Felix. Before Mr. Sawgrass could hype up their fight, Scalding Winter catapulted his daggers towards Felix with a powerful swing of his arms. Cling cling. Fire and ice energies trailed in their wake, merging and separating in a mesmerizing display of power before turning into massive blue and red furious dragons. The audience held their breath, entranced by the swirling dance of flames and frost while the fighters escaped from the dragon's path with fearful expressions, knowing that their barriers wouldn't hold against them. Meanwhile, Felix remained calm, his eyes narrowing as he focused his vibration powers. With a single, decisive gesture, he slammed his hand onto the ground. A pulse of vibrational energy erupted from beneath him, causing a humongous patch of the arena floor to rise up in the sky and act as a natural shield. Boom! The fiery and icy dragon smashed against the hard floor of the arena and broke it into countless fragments before dying off into Felix's vibration field. Felix's vibration field could counter any elemental ability, but it was within reason. It was impossible to block such powerful attacks in time since their frequencies were too agitated and erratic, making it extremely difficult to neutralize them in time. My turn. Felix tensed his body and finally moved, jumping into the sky and using the flying fragments of the ground as a platform to increase his speed until he arrived at the metallic chains. His vibration field had neutralized the dragons, but the daggers and the chains weren't affected as much. When Scalding Winter saw Felix being near his chained weapons, he grimaced and tried to yank his chained weapons back. Alas, with a swift movement of his hand, Felix sent a powerful surge of vibration energy towards Scalding Winter's weapon. The air rippled around the chained daggers as they absorbed Felix's vibrational energy. The chained weapons trembled, the vibrations grew more and more intense, and then the energy crawled up the chains towards Scalding Winter. His eyes widened in surprise as he could feel the fast approaching dreadful vibration pulses, but he didn't know whether to let go of the chains or not. He knew if he let go of them, he might lose them for good as Felix was on hold of the daggers. I can't block it. In a split second, Scalding Winter let go of the chain, and the powerful vibration still whipped him directly, causing him to get launched in the direction of the Colosseum's walls. "Get hold of yourself!" Madame Arabella yelled furiously as she watched her investment about to get eliminated with the trash of the tournament. Whether he heard her or not, Scalding Winter had no intentions of losing like this. Fire blasts! He somersaulted in the sky to regain his balance, and then he fired powerful fire blasts from his hands and feet to stop his momentum. After a few explosions, his speed came to a halt and he remained floating above the arena's surface. "Cool toys," Felix commented as he held the chained daggers with both hands, swinging them around him in a masterful and elegant manner like he was born to wield them. "Bastard!" Scalding Winter didn't like this sight in the slightest, as he thought that Felix was provoking him. So, he didn't hesitate to charge in his direction, initiating a second assault. Alas! This was still a battle royal with 100 contestants in a small arena. Boredom! 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 Before he could even cross half the distance, he found himself getting jumped by at least 10 fighters, taking advantage of his cracked telekinesis shield and missing weapons. They had been observing the duel between Felix and Scalding Winter and were well aware of the high stakes. Knowing that Scalding Winter was now vulnerable, it was only natural to pounce and get rid of one of the strongest fighters in their group. A hulking figure known as Boulder, with skin like jagged rock, launched massive stone fists in Scalding Winter's direction. At the same time, a mercurial figure named Silverwind, made entirely of glimmering particles, unleashed a tempest of razor-sharp gusts towards him, and from the distance, Pyre, a spirit wreathed in a flaming aura, directed a wave of searing fire. Scalding Winter was soon on the defensive, evading, blocking, and counterattacking where he could. Without his trusted weapons, he was forced to create 2 daggers from ice and fire to use his infamous twin elemental dance. Even when it was a 10 vs 1 battle, he still created a dazzling spectacle of sparks, steam, and flickering shadows, but the continuous barrage was taking its toll. His movements started to slow, and he began to falter. The crowd watched in an enthralled silence as the once dominant fighter was now caught in a desperate struggle for survival. Unfortunately for him, he had started a fight with a predator. Felix had stayed out of the direct conflict, observing and analyzing. Now, the time was right to make his move. Felix swiftly maneuvered his way through the battlefield, deftly sidestepping rival fighters and their potent abilities. Even if someone tried to be funny and attack him, Felix made them regret the thought. His gaze locked on Scalding Winter, the rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with the pulsating vibrations emanating from his body. Let's see how those toys will fare. As he neared his target, Felix focused his vibrations on the chained daggers. The daggers began to hum, vibrating in sync with Felix's energy, causing even the viewers to see air getting distorted this time. With a swift burst of movement, Felix closed the remaining distance between them. Utilizing the stolen chained daggers, he launched a flurry of vibrating attacks on Scalding Winter. His movements were as unpredictable as they were swift, taking advantage of Scalding Winter's momentary vulnerability. Slice! Slice! The crowd watched in awe as Felix turned the tide of the battle in an instant with dominant strikes more powerful than even 10 fighters' combined assaults. Crack crack! *T! 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 Scalding Winter's expression grew uglier and uglier with each direct hit on his telekinesis barrier, as Felix's attacks always result in the creation of a massive fissure. This made him realize that unless he made a change, his barrier was bound to break in a few seconds at best and leave him weakened by those beasts. Alas! Against Felix Maxwell, not a single enemy was ever given a chance to turn the battle around the moment he sunk his teeth into his flesh. Felix flicked his wrist and sent one end of the chained daggers spiraling towards Scalding Winter. The sharpened edge bit into the icy platform, creating a distraction. In the blink of an eye, Felix closed the distance, lunging forward to wrap the second chain around his opponent's torso. Scalding Winter, still reeling from the sudden attack, tried to fight back, but the vibrating chains around his body sent him into disarray, disrupting his balance. Before he could free himself, Felix tightened his grip on the chained daggers, causing the chains to wrap tighter around Scalding Winter, binding his limbs to his body. "You should have stayed away from me and secured your spot." With this indifferent statement resounding deep into Scalding Winter's ears, Felix pulled the chained daggers forcefully, invoking a potent vibration, akin to a forceful seismic wave. Then, he swung him once and launched him into the Colosseum's wall, causing the crowd to gasp in astonishment as they watched him soaring through the air akin to a cannonball. Scalding Winter, his form a helpless projectile, crashed into the Colosseum wall with a resonating impact. He wasn't given even a single chance to stop his momentum this time, as the throw was simply too powerful. "Whoa! He is down! Clap! Clap!" He slumped to the ground, motionless and defeated, while the audience roared in amazement and thrill at the end of the fight. "Scalding Winter is out of the ring!" shouted Mr. Sawgrass, the thrill clear in his voice. "An incredible display from the traveler, folks. Damn it!" Madame Arabella slammed her fist on the armchair angrily. Black lines were already covering her entire forehead. She invested too much in Scalding Winter to push him to win the tournament and get excellent results in the Heavenly Plane tournament. Alas, her hopes were dashed the moment she decided to torment Felix. "He is too strong. I am starting to think that only the Ravager, Avalanche, and Goliath the Juggernaut are capable of taking him down in this tournament," Boss Gideon commentated. "We will see about that," Mr. Atticus said calmly, his eyes placed on Felix, who was being avoided akin to a plague in the arena. Not a single fighter dared to target him after his performance, realizing that it was much easier to secure one of the other 3 slots than attempt to eliminate him. So, for the next 10 minutes, Felix was seen sitting near the edge of the arena with his arm resting on his knee, scanning the ongoing chaos in a nonchalant manner. Just like the area around him was a banned zone, not a single fight was picked near him, which created a bizarre scene for the viewers. What an interesting newbie! Standing tall amidst the first group of fighters, the figure of Ravager was as imposing as it was intriguing. He possesses an alluring charisma of a stoic warrior, his icy gaze filled with inscrutable depth, often leaving his opponents unnerved. His skin has an ethereal soft golden glow, showcasing his status as a newly risen golden spirit. Intricate tattoos adorn his body, swirling around his muscular arms and broad shoulders. His hair, a wild untamed mane, while his attire of fluid silks mirrors his affinity to water. His demeanor was not that of one who brags, but of a cold and serious predator who lets his skills speak for him. This was Ravager, the previous 2 times champion of Australia's Spectral Tournament in a row, stealing the crown from the known most powerful fighters, Goliath and Avalanche. His strength and battle experience were so overwhelming, almost 99% of the fighters join those tournaments for the sake of securing the 2nd or 3rd rank. He was that overbearing. Sensing 2 pressuring pair of eyes on him, Felix turned his head to the side in a relaxed manner and returned the stare to the Ravager in the midst of the chaos reigning in the Colosseum. Felix and Ravager, standing across from one another, their eyes locked in an intense standoff, the air between them seemed to vibrate, each sizing up the other with silent scrutiny. Around them, the Colosseum was in a state of frenzy. The ground shook with impact, smoke and dust filling the air, clouding the vibrant bursts of elemental abilities. Fighters charged, bellowed, and fell. Energy blasts rocketed skyward, shattering the heavens in a spectacular display of power. Yet amidst all the mayhem, their unemotional expressions were unchanged, each man seemed carved from stone. No words were needed, for their eyes spoke volumes more than words ever could. It was clear to all, a storm was about to break between these 2. To think I will be forced to take such weaklings seriously again, isn't it ironicusna? Felix shook his head, breaking off the intense stare down like it was nothing. While his mind was as creepily silent as everyone else, Felix imagined Isna mocking the Ravager with her assholish personality. He sniggered to himself for a moment before his stoic expression retook control over him again. Is he laughing at me? While it was brief, the Ravager caught him in the act and he didn't seem pleased in the slightest. Unfortunately for him, Felix didn't bother to glance in his direction ever again. Some time later, the Mimic Joker has fallen at last. With that, we have our 4 finalists, and first 4 fighters to make it to the tournament. Mr. Sawgrass extended his hand widely and congratulated loudly, "Make some noise for the Traveler, the Banshee, Morris, and Miss Jasmine." Clap clap clap. Out of nowhere, a single pair of hands started clapping, the sound echoing through the vast expanse. It was soon followed by another, then another until the entire Colosseum resonated with the applause of thousands of spectators. In the center of the arena stood the 4 finalists, Felix, the Banshee, Morris, and Miss Jasmine. Besides Felix, the 3 finalists looked like they had gone through hell 7 times and came back worse each time. To survive a battle royal with hundreds of fighters was no easy task, and if Felix hadn't displayed his overwhelming strength, he would have become like them. After the applause died down, they were excused from the arena and the dice were rolled yet again to decide the next group. In the meantime, the arena went into a rapid reparation, becoming brand new in less than a few seconds. The next group is number 1. All fighters please grace the stage. Mr. Sawgrass requested. Avalanche's group. Felix's cold eyes followed the sole golden shimmering spirit amidst 100 fighters. Avalanche. He was a lean humanoid bear with snow-white fur that gleamed like a field of untouched snow under the sunlight. He was considered one of the favorites to triumph the competition if he prepared enough to take down Ravager and get his revenge from the last tournament. The fight that Felix watched on the TV was a replay of a very old competition where Goliath and Avalanche were still dominating the competition. But now? It was too hard to predict the outcome with Felix and Ravager involved. What an expected but disappointing turn of events. Mr. Sawgrass sighed at the sight of Avalanche sitting at the edge of the arena while the rest of the fighters stayed as far as possible from him. While no one was dumb enough to take the risk and fight off Felix, Avalanche, Goliath, and Ravager were on a whole different plane. Unless those 3 sought to warm up in those group battles, it was impossible to see them breaking a sweat unless someone joined the competition without a single clue about their reputation. Thus, the next 3 battle royals were quite exciting but not too explosive, with those 3 acting as mere spectators. In less than an hour, the final 12 finalists were decided and the competition came to a close for one day to give the fighters proper rest before the real deal begins. Back in the national park, Felix could be sitting under the same tree while Kuro was cooking a hot pot in the open under the stars. As for Sekiro, he was sent to secure some spiritual treasures in the black market. As the name implied, no one cared about the rules, laws, blacklist orders, or whatnot due to all the trades being carried outside of the law's all-seeing eyes. However, it wasn't all good and magical, as the prices of the items there were at least triple the market price. Still, Felix had been sending Sekiro consistently on a daily basis to get as many spiritual treasures as possible at the most reasonable prices. In those past weeks, Felix had spent close to 30,000 Loomis on them alone, but they were worth it as they made his battles much easier. If it wasn't for those upgrades, it would have been much more annoying to deal with Scalding Winter. The price might reach triple or even higher for each treasure, but I have to increase my spiritual prowess as much as possible before I meet those 3 monsters. Felix thought. Even though those 3 fighters hadn't showcased anything in today's competition, Felix knew deeply what they were capable of. Even Scalding Winter wasn't their match, and Madame Arabella was merely dreaming of him coming close to their level. As long as I can defend myself against their telekinesis prowess, I will be all right. Felix returned to his training, attempting to master a vibration ability capable of neutralizing mental energy more effectively and rapidly. Right now, he was struggling to make it happen due to the mental energy nature being on a different plane of frequencies. The only reason he easily broke his opponent's telekinesis barriers was due to its frequency being stable, as those barriers could be considered somewhat physical. The same couldn't be applied to the rest of the telekinesis abilities. Some time later, Sekiro returned with an irritated expression like he was just fed cow's dung forcefully. That bad? Felix asked. You have no idea. Sekiro closed his eyes and poured the bought spiritual treasures and the Loomis change in front of Felix. That's it. Even Felix's unemotional expression turned for the worst after seeing that Sekiro had bought with him an abysmal amount of spiritual treasures with the kind of capital he had given him. Sorry, boss, but you have become kind of famous, and as your servant, I have also entered the blacklisted database. Sekiro sighed. Those dishonest merchants knew that you are desperate for spiritual treasures for the sake of the competition and jacked up the price quite heavily. The ones before you are the cheapest considering the circumstances. I see. Felix frowned. Don't worry, this is on me, I should have thought about it beforehand. Still, good thing we have bought a decent amount in the past weeks before they caught up. Sekiro shivered. I would have honestly punched some of them if I was forced to waste 40,000 Loomis on such exorbitant prices. The next morning, a grandiose holographic panel illuminated the massive Colosseum, casting an ethereal glow over the eager spectators. The atmosphere was electric, with the audience on the edge of their seats, their eyes glued to the panel above. It was finally the moment of the draw. The stage was set for the 16 chosen fighters of the spectral tournament. Mr. Sawgrass ascended onto the stage and motioned toward the holographic panel, which began to swirl with intricate, ever-changing patterns of light. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, his voice resonating through the arena, the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to decide the brackets. He reached out and pressed a button on his crystal device. The swirling lights of the holographic panel started to coalesce into distinct orbs, each representing a fighter. The orbs started to float randomly, then one by one, they moved toward their designated slots in the bracket. The first matchup appeared. The orbs of Avalanche, the snow-white humanoid bear, and Felix's orb moved together, their names appearing side by side on the panel. A low murmur of anticipation filled the stadium as the audience realized the high-profile matchup in the first round itself. Next, the orbs of Ravager and Goliath floated away from each other, their names appearing on the edges of the brackets, making everyone understand that those two could only fight at the finals. The process continued until all the fighters were assigned their places in the bracket. I have to fight Avalanche and either Goliath or Ravager in the finals, what a shitty draw. Even though Felix cursed, not an ounce of fear or bother was seen on his face. He wasn't intimidated, but mildly irritated by the difficulty of the battles. His last night's preparation had given him an additional boost of confidence to deal with those three monsters. Let the battles begin. Following Mr. Sawgrass' announcement, the two first contestants graced the stage. It was no other than Miss Jasmine from Group 3 and Goliath the Juggernaut from Group 4. As both combatants entered the arena, their respective auras flared up, illuminating the arena with vibrant hues of golden and vibrant red. Goliath the Juggernaut was deserving of such a name as he was a solid figure standing tall at over 4 meters. He was a testament to raw strength, his body was a fascinating fusion of metal and earth elements, his skin resembled a blend of rugged terrain and gleaming metal, reflecting the stage lights with an ethereal glow. On the other side of the platform stood Miss Jasmine, a stark contrast to Goliath's imposing form. Standing at a modest 1.5 meters, she was an embodiment of elegance and grace. Her skin held a gentle, green hue, much like the stem of a rose, that was further accentuated by the soft, floral patterns that decorated her body. As these two figures stood on the stage, their unique appearances showcased their elemental affinities, setting the platform for the unforgettable spectacle that was about to unfold. I hope she at least makes him use some of his new trump cards. Felix thought as he watched Miss Jasmine initiate the battle. Whirlwind vines. With a graceful twirl, her hands danced in the air, summoning a whirlwind of thorny vines which sprung forth from the ground, entwining themselves around Goliath. The audience gasped as the sharp thorns bit into his rocky skin, poison seeping into his veins. She was a plant/poison elementalist and was one of Boss Gideon's reputable representatives due to her always qualifying for the tournament and sometimes reaching even the semi-finals. Alas, Goliath wasn't called a monster for no reason. He merely grunted, his body radiating with heat as the metal element within him reacted to the poison, neutralizing it. With a roar that echoed through the arena, he stomped his foot onto the ground. Earth and magma elements melded together, the ground underneath Miss Jasmine cracked open, spewing a fountain of molten magma toward her. Swift as a deer, Miss Jasmine evaded the blast of magma, summoning a barrage of toxic darts made of plant matter and launching them toward Goliath. He responded by erecting a wall of solid metal, blocking the lethal barrage. As the fight ensued, Goliath manipulated the terrain to his advantage, using his mastery over earth and magma to launch relentless attacks, each more fierce than the last. Jasmine, on the other hand, used her poison to corrode his defenses while using her plant abilities to heal her injuries and evade attacks. Unfortunately, the tournament had a HP system and no matter how much Jasmine healed herself, those direct hits still registered. So, the battle ended in Goliath's favor the instant he landed the last 20th hit, causing the fight to conclude between them. Clap clap clap! The audience cheered as they watched Miss Jasmine walking down the arena with a disappointed expression. She knew the battle was done the moment she matched against Goliath due to his elements countering hers heavily, which caused her to receive many hits in such a short time. I used to watch battles end only with death or surrender, this feels off. Felix shook his head, unsatisfied by the outcome of the fight, feeling like he was left with no closure. Sadly, this was the reality of having no death or UVR in the spirit realm. No matter how the spirits attempted to make their lives resemble the living world, at the end of the day, they were still dead. This hit threshold system was the only thing making sure the battles end in a decent duration, and if it wasn't for it, the spirits might continue torturing each other until one of them finally caved into the pain. Next, Constance. Please step forward. It's my turn. After the applause died down, Felix glanced at the screen and saw that his battle was next. He fixed his clothes and walked to the platform from one side while Avonlence was gracing it from the other. The moment both of them landed on the arena, the entire Colosseum exploded in frenzied cheers and the bets started flying in on each side. While Felix had demonstrated himself to be a deadly fighter, he was still not as renowned as Avalanche, making the gambling dens give a much higher pay on his win. If only I was able to bet on myself, I would have come out of this tournament 10 times richer. Felix sighed while cracking his fingers. The moment Felix learned about gambling in the tournaments, his first thought was to always bet on himself. Unfortunately, his hopes were soon dashed by Sekiro as he informed him that combatants and their servants were incapable of putting money into any battle they were participating in. It was done like this to stop them from throwing battles for the sake of a good payoff. If he dared to make a shady deal with outsiders and threw the fight either way, he would get found out easily as the legal authorities were the ones responsible for such investigations. They weren't to be f***ed around with if they had full investigation access. So, Felix dropped the thought entirely. Both combatants ready? Mr. Sawgrass asked. Avalanche nodded with a sleepy look, seemingly wanting this battle to end as fast as possible to return to his slumber. You may begin. Felix permitted indifferently, making Mr. Sawgrass' eyelids twitch at his commanding tone. Still, he swallowed his displeasure and kicked off the battle immediately. Fight! Without wasting a moment, Avalanche pulled at his water element, the air around him dropping drastically in temperature. Whoosh! He manipulated the water molecules in the air, conjuring a chilling blizzard that shrouded the battlefield in a curtain of frost and snow. Through the storm, Avalanche charged forward, his body crystallizing into an armored glacier. Felix remained unfazed, his own aura beginning to pulse more noticeably. Harmonic tremor. He smacked his hands once and sent a low-frequency blast that swept across the icy terrain, shattering the surface and weakening Avalanche's charge. In retaliation, Avalanche raised his hand, conjuring shards of ice in mid-air. With a powerful sweep of his arm, the shards propelled towards Felix, sparkling ominously in the arena lights. Yet, Felix remained untouched, using his anti-elemental vibration barrier to resonate with the frequencies of those ice shards and neutralize them. The moment he blocked them, Felix launched himself forward. Each step on the ground released a rumbling tremor underneath. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Just like building a symphony, the rumbling increased in intensity until Felix was merely tens of meters away from avalanche. Rumble. Then, he took one final step and the earth seemed to have been flipped upside down as the arena broke in half from the center, leaving behind a yawning chasm. Not bad, but you have already shown this ability before. Avalanche commentated lazily as he manifested a dome of ice around him, predicting that Felix was going to use the giant pieces of the arena as his main weapon. I never use the same technique twice. Felix replied back in a calm manner while pointing a finger gun in the direction of Avalanche. He charged an intense vibration into a tiny point at his fingertip, forming a bullet-like shape from the ambient metallic dust around him. The buzz of energy around his finger grew in intensity until it was nearly deafening. With a quick flick of his finger, he released the charged bullet, propelling it through the air at supersonic speed. It raced across the divided arena, smoke and debris, and punched through the ice dome that Avalanche had erected as a defense, leaving a neat hole in its wake. The bullet continued its journey unabated, crashing into Avalanche's telekinetic barrier with an echoing crack, hairline fractures spider webbing across its surface. Avalanche's sleepy attitude was no more to be seen as he eyed his cracked telekinesis barrier with a puzzled look, seemingly incapable of understanding what happened. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end of Felix's barrage. Pew! 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 Just like he was a Wild West gunslinger, Felix kept jumping from one flying rock to another while firing multiple bullets at Avalanche from many directions. The tip of his fingers turned red from friction caused by the intense vibration in air molecules, yet he wasn't planning to stop. What kind of technique is that? I am starting to doubt that his element is sound more and more. The audience gasped in awe, as the noise of Felix's bullets echoed throughout the colossal stadium. Crack! Crack! Realizing that he wasn't in the best of situations, Avalanche finally broke out of his daze and reinforced his ice dome until the bullets weren't able to penetrate its thick surface anymore. If Avalanche kept underestimating him, this might be the first time he never makes it past the single elimination group. Ravager thought to himself, his stoic eyes affixed on the ongoing assault. Avalanche seemed to have realized this fact as well. The moment I recover my telekinesis barrier, I will go all in on him. He decided. His expression resembled a fierce predator polar bear, seeing flesh after weeks. Unbeknownst to him, the moment he thickened his ice dome, he had locked himself inside and made it harder to see the outside as light particles weren't able to penetrate its surface as easily. He could be uttered to have blinded himself in front of no one but Felix. Let's see if this will work. Felix landed upside down on a giant rock that was about to reach its peak velocity and extended one arm forward while the other pulled back, making him seem like he was holding a sniper rifle. Then, energy hummed through Felix's veins akin to an insistent drumbeat, swelling from his shoulder down to the tips of his fingers. The waves of energy grew intense at the tip of his extended finger, pulsating with the untamed might of raw vibration. With a swift, fluid motion, he reached into his pocket and produced a long, silver bullet, positioning it meticulously at the apex of the amassed vibrational energy. His eyes, sharp and focused, locked onto Avalanche, who stood ensnared within his ice dome. Resonance frequency. Waiting for the perfect moment, Felix activated his frequency neutralization ability, targeting the ice dome. This was a different technique to the anti-elemental barrier as he was planning to vibrate the ice molecules fast enough to break apart the hydrogen bonds that hold the ice in its solid form, thus turning it into liquid water. In other words, using frequencies to change the form of an element. His ability seemed to have succeeded as the once thick icy shield shuddered and began to transform into liquid. In that moment of instability, Felix let loose the silver bullet. It shot through the air, a gleaming arrow of energy, cutting through the disrupted dome and landing directly on Avalanche's chest at an alarming speed. Hey! Before Avanalj could even react to his ice dome turning into water, he found himself hurled into the depth of the chasm with blood coming out of his chest and back as the bullet penetrated him thoroughly. Stunned and somewhat dumbfounded, the sponsors and the rest of the viewers had the words stuck in their throats at the sight of Avalanche disappearing into the darkness of the underground. They weren't expecting a one-sided show, as no one was dumb enough to disrespect Felix after his previous performances, but none of them thought that it would be one-sided the other way around. Unfortunately for them, the shock wasn't even close to being over, as Felix still had plenty to offer. Felix intensed his remaining energy, wanting to go for the kill. He raised his hands, and a surge of invisible power cascaded from his fingers. The rubble and detritus that had once made up the arena floor began to tremble, then shake violently. Arise! He tightened his grip, and like marionettes obeying the command of their puppet master, the debris of rocks and boulders began to rise, levitating in the air around Felix. Beneath him, Avalanche was caught in the chasm, struggling to comprehend his current situation. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted as he saw the shadow of the hovering debris closing over him. Oh no! The light dwindled as the chasm above was filled, becoming a sea of levitating rubble, making him understand that Felix wanted to bury him. Not giving him even a moment to escape, Felix brought his hands down with all the force he could muster. Responding to his command, the floating debris plummeted toward the earth with crushing force. A symphony of collisions echoed throughout the stadium as every rock, every fragment, found its place, sealing the chasm and Avalanche's fate within under the widened eyes of the viewers. As the dust rose into the sky and cast a shadow on Felix's figure, lips trembled, eyes shuddered, and the hearts of the viewers and the fighters thumped. Silence covered the entire Colosseum as even Mr. Sagras was seen staring at the ruined arena at the loss of words about his commentary. Is it dawn? Rumble. Before Felix could finish his thought, an unnoticeable tremor was picked by his sensitive ears, making his expression turn stern again. As expected, they aren't easy to take down. Boom. The dust of the collapsed arena was still settling, the cheers of Felix's victory echoing through the silent air. The spectators' faces were still turned to the figure standing alone in the center of the arena, their applause ringing out in unison. Then, a thunderous crash resonated from beneath the ground, the vibrations reaching every corner of the Colosseum. The ground shivered, then convulsed violently as a massive formation of ice erupted from beneath the arena floor. Jaws dropped in shock as a giant sword, carved of the clearest ice and glinting menacingly in the sunlight, thrust upwards into the sky. Astride this icy behemoth was none other than Avalanche himself, bloodied and battered, yet unbowed. His white fur was stained red, his body marred with gashes and bruises, but the fire in his eyes was stronger than ever. Traveler! He roared, the sound rippling through the Colosseum, causing the cheers to die abruptly. His breath came in ragged pants, his chest heaving while his eyes were filled with an untamed fury locked onto Felix. The Colosseum fell into stunned silence. The taste of victory was swiftly replaced by the anticipation of a renewed fight. Avalanche hasn't given up yet. But, how long can he last with only 2 hits left before his elimination? Mr. Sagras commentated excitedly as he highlighted a small number on top of Avalanche's head. It was 18 written in red. He must have blocked many hits down there. Felix frowned, knowing that the number should have been much higher. Traveler! With another furious roar, Avalanche launched himself toward Felix while extending his grip forward like he wanted to choke him out. *T. Felix's expression turned for the worst as the air itself around him was bent to Avalanche's psychokinetic energy before it latched onto him. He felt like he was caught by an iron grip, invisible but unbearably strong, anchoring him to his spot as surely as chains would. A vicious snarl twisted Avalanche's muzzle as his hands danced with a cold, eerie light, summoning his ice abilities. Ice shards, sharp as daggers, emerged from his palms and flew towards Felix with frightening speed, crashing against his telekinetic barrier. Felix's barrier flickered under the relentless barrage, shimmering waves of energy struggling to keep the icy onslaught at bay. Avalanche was relentless. He raised a claw, and a frigid gust, teeming with minuscule ice particles, stormed towards Felix. The gale force wind lashed against Felix's barrier, each ice particle a hammer blow. Focus, focus, focus. Felix's face twisted with exertion, sweat dripping from his forehead as he fought to maintain his barrier while at the same time wanting to use his vibration to neutralize the telekinetic energy holding into him. He found it already difficult to pull it off while he was at peace, don't even mention in this stressful situation. Avalanche's barrage was relentless, his eyes were cold, unwavering in their intensity as he watched Felix's barrier begin to splinter. Begone! With a roar that echoed through the silent arena, Avalanche brought down his fist. A colossal icicle, sharp and deadly, spiraled toward Felix. It crashed against his barrier with an earth-shattering impact. The barrier rippled, flickered, and with a flash of light, shattered into a million sparks. Boom! Cough! The crowd gasped as they watched Felix coughing out blood while laying amidst chilling ice rubble. Ice chains! Avalanche wasn't even close to appeasing his anger as he manifested multiple chilling chains from the rubble and controlled them to ensnare Felix's limbs. Traveler is in grave danger. If he can't free himself, Avalanche will reach the hit threshold in no time. Mr. Sawgrass disclosed out loud, his widened eyes affixed on Felix's star-like ensnare body. I am in trouble. Even Felix knew that his situation wasn't optimal at all. While the chains were pretty easy to break from, the overpowering telekinesis pressure was still on him, keeping him affixed to the ground. As much as he overestimated Avalanche and the other two monsters' telekinesis prowess, he was still caught off guard and his preparation wasn't enough to counter it successfully. Think, there has to be a way to win this. Felix's new rational and ruthless personality made him incapable of having his emotions take the best of him even in such desperate situations. So, he started calculating and thinking of a new strategy while his indifferent eyes were affixed on Avalanche in the sky. Icicles rain. With arms spread wide as he manipulated the moisture in the air, Avalanche manifested countless sharp icicles, hanging above Felix like a deadly chandelier, their lethal points gleaming ominously in the arena's light. Release. The moment Avalanche's hands slammed down, the sky fell. Hundreds of razor-sharp icicles rained down on Felix, a glacial storm intent on piercing him to shreds. The air around Felix began to hum, a low vibration that grew into a throbbing pulse as he summoned an counter-magic barrier. Alas, there were just too many icicles, and the vibrations needed to match each icicle's frequency to nullify it in time before it landed on Felix. With Felix's current understanding and mastery of the vibration element, he wasn't yet at the level to nullify anything in his path. Thus, the barrier rippled and faltered, managing to deflect only a fraction of the icicle onslaught, leaving the audience gasping in collective horror as the remainder of the icy barrage showered Felix, each hit resonating like a chilling death knell. 5, 7, 12. The number of direct hits with required damage kept increasing on top of Felix's head, making him and everyone else understand that he was merely a few seconds away from elimination. While the pain was extremely intense and his body was riddled with chilling bloody holes, Felix's expression remained as stoic as ever, like he had no pain receptors. I guess there is no other option left. Instead, his mind was occupied with a method to save himself. In the end, he realized that his mastery of the vibration element was still not enough to deal with those monsters and he had to improve his whole strategy. I have one chance to pull it off and end this. Felix closed his eyes, his face a picture of intense concentration, his fists were clenched tightly at his sides, each finger vibrating slightly. Suddenly, a flicker of flame sprang to life around his hands, dancing and crackling as it began to grow in intensity and volume. At his command, the vibrations within his hands rapidly escalated, causing the flames to surge and grow brighter. Before Avalanche and the viewers could react in a flash, the fire vibration mixture spread into his entire body and it exploded. Boom! The shockwave was so devastating, it spread outwards like a small star had ignited in the heart of the arena. The ice chains were no more, and what's more surprising, the telekinetic hold Avalanche had on Felix was immediately shattered. The hell! The raw, brute pressure of the blast was too overwhelming, and it forced him to focus completely his telekinesis on his protection, which weakened his hold on Felix. As the shockwave died down and the atmosphere began to return to normal, there, at the epicenter of the explosion, stood Felix, his once vibrant aura now replaced by a chilling calm. His clothes were singed, tattered, hanging off his frame like the remnants of a battle long fought. His skin was bloodied, peppered with tiny cuts from the shockwave, each wound a stark contrast against the pale pallor of his skin. His hair, now wild and disheveled from the blast, framed his face, casting dark shadows over his piercing eyes. Despite his injuries, his stance was unwavering, defiant against the brutal aftermath of his own creation. It was a sight that sent a collective shiver down the spine of the onlookers. Wah, what a madman! He actually tried to blow himself up. Dear Lord, does he not feel pain? How can he not pass out? Whether it was the sponsors, the fighters, or the viewers, none of them managed to process the current situation before them. Felix wasn't planning to give anyone time to do so. Channeling his vibrational power into his palm, Felix introduced the element of fire. The bullets, once simply silver and metallic, now glowed with a fiery intensity, a deadly combination of vibration and fire, ready to be launched. Without any hesitation, Felix let out a low growl, burning quake bullets. In an instant, the bullets shot forward with a sonic speed, their trajectory a deadly dance of vibrational energy and crackling fire. The air around them distorted due to the immense heat and pulsating vibrational energy, leaving a trail of flickering embers and trembling air in their wake. Not expecting an immediate retaliation after such an overwhelming explosion, the fire bullets struck the stunned Avalanche, their vibrational energy allowing them to penetrate his icy exterior with ease. Each hit was like a mini explosion, a burst of fiery flames and crippling vibrations, causing Avalanche to be pushed higher and higher into the sky, his mighty form racked with pain. Crack crack, shatter. Oh no! The relentless barrage of the burning quake bullets proved too much for his incomplete telekinesis barrier, shattering into pieces after the 10th bullet. The immediate Felix saw his barrier fading away, he fired 2 more fiery bullets, and the moment they were about to land on Avalanche, he muttered, "Ignite." Then, as if reacting to Felix's will, the vibration stored inside those bullets agitated the frequency of the fire bullets, causing them to explode simultaneously. An earth-shaking boom echoed throughout the arena, followed by a blinding flash of fiery light. The force of the explosion was akin to that of 2 grenades, a devastating surge of energy that tore through Avalanche's body. Arg! A roar of pain echoed through the Colosseum, quickly followed by the sound of a heavy body colliding with the protective barrier of the arena. When the dust settled, the audience could see Avalanche's enormous form slumped against the barrier, his eyes showing only white. While Felix was able to handle such an enormous explosion on a close range without passing out, the same didn't apply to the others. While he kept calling them monsters, in reality, the only monster in this entire tournament was no one else but him. This conclusion seemed to have taken root inside everyone's minds as the echo of the explosion still rang in their ears, a reminder of everything that transpired before them. A momentary silence filled the Colosseum. The spectators blinked, stunned, as they tried to comprehend the brutal spectacle they had just witnessed. Then, the silence shattered as the crowd erupted in a deafening roar of applause and cheers. They jumped to their feet, the stands shaking as they shouted Felix's name in unison. The sound filled the Colosseum, echoing back from the tall, imposing walls. This is a first of its kind. Avalanche, the 5-time champions, has been eliminated in the first round of the tournament by the hands of neither Goliath nor Ravager. Mr. Sawgrass observed excitedly. I have to say this is a bit unexpected. He can use even fire, somehow, I am not shocked. A fighter of his caliber should be at least a duo elementalist. From the VIP section, the various sponsors and dignitaries looked on with a mix of shock and awe. Even those who had written off Felix could not help but be impressed by the raw display of power and strategic acumen. Meanwhile, in the fighters section, the other contestants watched Felix with newfound wariness and respect. A chill ran through the remaining fighters as they realized the imposing challenge they would have to face in the upcoming battles. But, the Ravager and Goliath didn't seem as worried. His telekinesis prowess is his weakness. As long as we capitalize on this from the start, he will be easy to handle. Both of them reached this conclusion. While Avalanche was caught off guard and failed to take real advantage, it wasn't going to be the same for them. After a few minutes, Felix escorted himself outside of the Colosseum entirely as he knew that the quarterfinals would be held in 2 days. Sekiro and Kura met him outside and they walked in the direction of the national park. "You are actually doing it," Sekiro said, his voice carried a tint of admiration. "Doesn't hurt, master?" Kura asked with a faint concerned tone, still not used to being open. "It's manageable," Felix replied calmly before coming to a full stop. He turned to the side and walked in the direction of a dark alley. "Be right back." Sekiro and Kura were puzzled by his sudden change of direction, but they followed orders. Felix found himself navigating through the maze of narrow, twisted alleys that spread like a spider web around the Colosseum. A sensation of being watched had gnawed at him, a prickle at the back of his neck that wouldn't leave even while he was in the middle of the battles. While there were thousands of eyes on him, the looks they were giving him were nowhere close as intense, bizarre, and borderline obsessed as the one he picked up. He stopped abruptly, turning around to face the follower he knew was there. "Come out," he ordered indifferently. "Kikiki, your senses sure are sharper than a blade." In the dim light cast by a solitary lantern hanging precariously from a nearby building, he saw her, the same cloaked figure with cat ears that had been watching him before. Her cloak seemed to blend into the shadows, and her cat-like eyes shone with an intense, reflective light. "You are?" Felix asked, his muscles tensed, ready for any sudden movements. But the mysterious woman didn't move. Instead, she let out the same bizarre laugh and said, "Lower your guard, I come in peace." Felix remained silent, waiting for her introduction. "Tisk, you're no fun." The woman removed the cloak and exposed an exotic beauty, accentuated by a sprinkling of delicate freckles across the bridge of her nose, while tufts of chestnut hair peeked out from her ears, adding an otherworldly charm to her visage. No reaction. The follower was left surprised as she assumed that Felix would have recognized her face immediately due to her infamous reputation. Instead, he just kept staring at her like a piece of wood. "Cough, you can call me Miss Sani. I am the owner of the sole private detection agency Spectrum Detection Services." Miss Sani introduced formally, changing her entire attitude to a solemn one. "Detection agency?" Felix frowned. "Is that even a thing in the spirit realm? There are barely a dozen across the entire heavenly plane and most of their services were related to pity cases. However, my agency is different." Miss Sani grinned a bit. "I am interested in the big fish and there is plenty of underground trash that needs to be cleaned up and thrown into the law enforcer's clutches." When Felix thought about it, he realized that the heavenly plane was indeed massively in favor of those in power and authority, which gave them the opportunity to abuse those below them. The perfect example was Kura's previous heartbreaking treatment by her master, and she had nowhere and no one to ask for help. Not even law enforcers could help her if she had no proof or the contract signed allowed her to get abused in such a manner. "Interesting, I guess if there is a problem, there is always a niche solution for it." Felix inquired, "So, you were hired to make my life even worse or to seek an employment offer to help me out?" "Neither." Miss Sani extended her hand and offered with a sincere tone, "I want you to be my servant and help me with my cases." Felix was somewhat taken aback by her response. He never thought he would ever be asked to be someone's servant in his life this directly. But, he wasn't offended or bothered by it as much as he was inquisitive about the offer. "Why me? If you are smart, you would have figured it out on your own." I am a blacklisted spirit who showed to not care about the higher UPS and abiding by their rules. For you to come at me with such an offer, means that you want an assistant who can help with a case or multiple cases against those higher UPS. Felix disclosed indifferently. She was right, he figured her out the moment she made the request and he merely asked for a confirmation. Kikiki, it's rare for me to be on the same page with another spirit. Miss Sani giggled weirdly as she covered her mouth. Then, a split second later her entire demeanor switched to a serious one like she was either a professional actor or a lunatic. Felix was leading to the latter, but he wasn't in a position to judge anyone. Listen up, I wanted to wait until you are done with the tournament before I make my offer so your focus wouldn't be divided, but your sensitive eyes made it impossible. Miss Sani addressed, I will give you until the end of the tournament to make up your decision, and don't bother asking me about the cases you will be handling as they are classified. What is it in it for me? Felix shook his head, I can earn enough Loomis through tournaments and especially the Heavenly Plane one. I doubt there is any kind of decent pay in your kind of industry. No matter how hard Felix thought about it, he couldn't fathom how it would be possible for such an agency to earn a decent wage if they were exclusively reliant on clients' requests. That's where you are mistaken. Miss Sani grinned, her eyes shimmered with unkind wickedness. My agency obtains at least 50% of all properties and resources of each criminal spirit we brought down to justice. Is that so? Felix's eyes gleamed under the dim light, sharing the same maliciousness in her eyes. It was like two kindred souls matching together at last as Felix immediately understood that Miss Sani wasn't going after the higher-up out of the goodness of her heart. Imagine obtaining 50% of the Red Fang's organization's properties and assets when bringing them down, even if the other half went to the government and he merely was given 20% of the shares, he still wouldn't be complaining about it. So, what do you say? What percentage? 5%. Not happening, 20%. 20%? Even I don't get that percentage as I need to take care of my own people. Miss Sani counter-offered, 10%, final offer, take it or leave it. Not enough to move me. Felix shook his head, I don't know your targets and what kind of assets they have, how difficult is their case, how long were you working on them, will they ever work out eventually? So many ifs and I would rather not throw away a sure method to secure Loomis for such an offer. First of all, you can continue doing your fights, I don't give a crap about them. Secondly, I will be providing you with a house to stay and your servants, which will help you avoid the daily homelessness penalty. Thirdly, I can lend you Loomis and allow you to use my servants to purchase anything you want to avoid the blacklist order. 10% with such benefits doesn't look that bad, right? Miss Sani smiled, knowing exactly what she was doing. It doesn't sound too bad, indeed. Felix was somewhat satisfied with her offer as he knew that he wasn't in perfect condition to haggle. His solution to build his own house wasn't a sure thing and if it didn't work, he might end up in the streets for a very long time, he couldn't afford that. Plus, the fact that he could move around the blacklist order in the markets was also a must if he desired to continue his journey in the tournaments. Still, Felix wasn't done haggling. How about the salary? Felix moved on, my services aren't cheap. You will get paid 2,000 Loomis, nothing more, nothing less. Our entire operation is based on payments after succeeding in cases, which means if you want a stable high salary, you have to give up on the 10% share. You can't have both. Fair enough. Felix knew that her answer would be like this as he would have done the same too. In fact, he was pleased that there was even a salary on the table. So, he didn't waste both of their times with this. One last thing, I have no interest in a permanent position. Felix said calmly, the moment I become a golden spirit, I will either be your partner if I like to continue with you or take my departure. So, you are telling me, you don't want a timer on the contract? Miss Sani asked. No. All relationships between servants and their masters were enforced by binding contracts unless the servant himself hadn't imposed one. For example, Kara's situation was so desperate, she just wanted to find a master and didn't have any other conditions. In the case of Felix, his main goal was to become a golden spirit and obtain a governmental position to be offered the reincarnation opportunity. Since golden spirits couldn't become servants to anyone, each servant that reached this grade automatically free himself. If there was a contract between the two parties that enforced the servant to not upgrade to golden rank, he had to respect it, otherwise, the law enforcers would be introduced. I don't mind. Miss Sani smiled, but, you will have to close more than 5 small cases and 1 major case before considering becoming a golden spirit. Sounds fair. Felix nodded in agreement. He didn't want to negotiate with this condition since his payment was dependent on the cases closed. Give me your agency location and I will be paying you a visit shortly with my servants. Felix informed her, you will have my answer by then. Miss Sani agreed and they both went their own separate ways. After Felix returned to Sekiro and Kara, the first thing he did was ask about Miss Sani and her agency. Why are you asking about that lunatic? Sekiro narrowed his eyes, having a bad feeling about this. We will be under her wing. Felix answered as he continued his walk toward the national park. Sekiro and Kara didn't even know how to respond. They knew that Felix wasn't a conventional master, but to cause trouble everywhere and anywhere he went? What's up with those reactions? Felix frowned, is she really that bad? Bad not in the sense she is hated by the public, but in the sense, no one wants to deal with her in fear of their own future. Sekiro sighed deeply, the entire upper echelon and the underground world consider her as their enemy and anyone related to her will suffer a much worse fate than just having a blacklist order on them. This is one of the reasons why even though she is a golden rank spirit, she has only 1 servant under her as no one wants to associate with her to not harm their future. Getting involved with her. It's like walking straight into a hurricane. The thrill is tempting, but the destruction is devastating. You don't want to be caught up in her storm, trust me. As he finished, he stepped back, leaving Felix alone with his thoughts in the eerie silence of the alleyway, his warnings echoing ominously. My people my ass. In the end, Felix was bothered by only Miss Sani's falsehood about her having servants under her, but in reality, she only had 1. Since the contract wasn't signed yet and he hadn't given her his word, Felix wasn't planning to let her get away with this. As for the rest, he couldn't care less as he wasn't here to build a future. Let's go pack up, Felix ordered. Sir. Drop it. Felix ordered. I hope everything goes well. Sekiro could wish with a bitter smile and follow his master to their tent. After they packed up, Felix and his employees took off right away toward Miss Sani's detection bureau. It was situated on the fringes of the city, far from the gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets. It was less of an official institution and more of a makeshift operation, a stark contrast to the grandeur associated with typical investigation bureaus. The office itself was nothing more than a modest apartment complex, easily overlooked amidst the sea of more imposing structures. A weather-beaten signboard hung lopsidedly over the entrance, the words Spectrum Detection Services peeling and faded. Is she broke? Felix's eyelids twitched, starting to have second thoughts about this whole thing. Still, he pushed his doubts down and knocked on the door. Key. The door opened with a squealing noise as it had never been oiled before, exposing a short unique boy. He was like an exquisite sculpture, shaped from pure white wax, his surface smooth and glistening with an ethereal sheen, his limbs were finely crafted, each detail painstakingly chiseled, possessing a lithe grace that belied his waxen nature. Atop his head, where a normal boy might have hair, sat a single, sturdy wick, its flame flickering merrily. When lit, it bathed the boy in a warm, soothing glow, casting moving shadows that seemed to bring him to life. Interesting, was there always such a race in the universe? Felix eyed the boy with an intrigued look. All the records across the history of the universe never showed even a diagram of such a race that resembled a living candle. Only in the spirit realm would it be possible to see all known and unknown races across its history in one melting pot. After all, the memory's reformation merely changed the personality, facial features, and such. The main body was still based on the previous race. Enter. The boy opened the door for Felix and his employees and then slid through the floor, leaving behind him crumbles of melted wax. Before Felix could step inside, Miss Sani came out to greet them. "Welcome to my modest abode." "It's modest all right," Felix remarked indifferently as his eyes scanned the minimally furnished apartment. The office was the heart of the bureau, cluttered with a myriad of documents, case files, and a few mementos from successful investigations. A single desk stood against one wall, a lone lamp casting a pool of light over the papers scattered about. 2 adjoining rooms served as bedrooms, each sparsely decorated, the beds more functional than comfortable. The kitchen was quaint and compact, bearing signs of use but also of a person who cared about cleanliness. The living room served as a reception area of sorts, the mismatched furniture hinting at the many stories this place had witnessed. Felix didn't expect a massive building with multiple floors, but at the same time, he didn't think that it was even possible for a golden spirit to be this poor. "Don't worry about your salary. I can pay you 3 years in advance or even more if you're skeptical about my financial condition," Miss Sani said, acting a bit hurt by his comment. She expected Felix to back off and trust her, alas. 3 years will do. Felix agreed. "Are you always this insensitive?" Miss Sani's lips twitched in vexation. "You have no idea," Sekiro murmured as softly as possible. With one glare from Felix, Sekiro hid under his straw hat and nothing was heard from him again. "Cough, feel free to sit anywhere," Miss Sani offered as she took them to the living room. After everyone was seated, the candle boy brought snacks and drinks, then, he slid away again. "Thanks, little Timmy." "MMMM." Little Timmy replied sluggishly. "I wonder why hasn't he left you as well?" Felix inquired calmly. "Looks like you heard about me." Miss Sani chuckled, not too bothered by his question. "I didn't expect that it will be a 2-man show." Felix narrowed his eyes. 10% doesn't sound too fair when it's going to be a partnership. "Fine, you will get 15%, just drop it." Miss Sani caved in immediately. She thought before that there was a very slim chance Felix would either sign the contract right away or have enough principle to not renegotiate after a price had been decided. Alas, Felix hadn't contemplated of either option as he wasn't stupid to get himself scammed in such an important decision. "That works." Fortunately, Felix wasn't that greedy and agreed to the offer. "Sign this, all conditions are written there," Miss Sani uttered as she forwarded a holographic contract to Felix. Felix read it carefully for a few minutes before he nodded in her direction and then signed it. Although there were some terms such as absolute loyalty, listening to orders, and other freedom-limiting terms, Felix still signed it. After all, no matter how good the conditions were, at the end of the day, he was still a servant through and through. The moment he did so, a wide smile broke on Miss Sani's face. "At last, I will have a decent assistant. It can't be that no one has piqued your interest before me. I am not the only blacklisted spirit." Felix frowned. "True, I had plenty of other assistants before, but I was forced to release all of them time and time again after they were offered to be removed from the blacklist." Miss Sani shook her head. "Doesn't the contract ensure absolute loyalty? Why did you let them leave?" Sekiro asked. "What's the point of having assistants that don't want to work wholeheartedly to steal, to bring those F***ers down to justice?" Miss Sani said coldly, "So, anyone who came to me with the request, I void their contract and let them leave after paying the termination fees." No wonder Miss Sani wanted Felix badly. She was clearly listening to his conversation with the city's rich lords in the restaurant and realized that Felix would never get removed from the list by them. So, he wouldn't be swayed like the others. "You don't have to worry about me," Felix uttered calmly, I am not interested in removing my blacklist order but in their assets. That's what I like to hear. Miss Sani smiled. So, what cases are you working on right now? Before I answer that, I need to ask you something. Miss Sani's voice turned tenser as she inquired, are you familiar with the term fallen specters? No. Felix turned to Sekiro for answers and realized that he was just as ignorant as him. However, what piqued his interest, even more, was Kura's reaction to the term. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, a sudden gasp escaping her lips. I think you should take a look at it. What's the matter? And nothing. Kura stuttered. Didn't I tell you to not hide anything from me? Felix's gaze got colder in displeasure. I can't. Felix's expression turned a bit softer as he knew the difference between can't and won't. Kura not being able to speak meant that a previous master of hers was related to this term and she couldn't talk about the subject without receiving punishment. All servants were banned from sharing any private details about their masters even if they broke off from them. This was a strict law that was respected and feared by everyone due to the vile consequence of being thrown off from the heavenly plane immediately. Interesting, you have just signed the contract and have already given me a significant lead. Miss Sani uttered with a thrilled tone. Even though Kura didn't say anything, her reaction alone was enough to make her understand that the case was related to one of her masters. All she needed to do was gather information about her previous masters and pinpoint the exact culprit. It turned out, she didn't even need to do this. Was it the noble? Your last master? Felix asked. I can't. Kura muttered, tears threatening to drop from her eyes. Felix didn't know if she was crying because of his questions or if she recalled some bad memories. Whatever it was, he backed off as he knew that nothing out of value would come out from her lips. Can you tell me more about these fallen specters? Felix inquired. Fallen specters is a term not even golden spirits know about. If it wasn't for an unfortunate coincidence, I would have been in the dark about them as well. Miss Sani manifested a hologram before everyone, showing a red-colored normal spirit. Before anyone could comment, the interior of the red spirit started to turn darker and darker like he was infested by an evil seed and it had spread its roots across his entire body. What the? Sekiro was left stunned as he watched the red spirit still emitting a red hue around him without a single change in his exterior appearance. However, his entire internal body was now a clamp of unsettling darkness. What are we watching? Felix asked, his voice as stern as it could get. This was the process of spirits becoming fallen specters after feasting on negative energies, spirits such as hate, fear, or despair for a consistent period of time until their new personalities break apart and allow those emotions to take hold of them. When that happens, fallen spirits begin to lose their illumination slowly until they became black-colored spirits. Miss Sani narrowed her eyes. Here is the kicker: when they reach that far, the fallen spirits can't lose any more illumination even if they had 100 billion lumis of debt. In other words, they couldn't be kicked out of the heavenly realm at all and had earned a permanent residency here. How is that possible? Sekiro responded strongly. There is no way the ethereal elders and Lord Hades would be ignorant about such a dangerous matter. I don't know about the elders, but Lord Hades definitely knows about this. Miss Sani sneered, but so what? There aren't enough fallen specters to cause a scene in the heavenly plane, and even if there were a decent amount of them, it was impossible to find them as they look just like us. Lord Hades wasn't interested in handling any small issue arising in his realm, as that was the job of the elders. Unless big matters that threatened the entire realm had occurred, he would turn a blind eye to everything happening under his nose. As mentioned, if Felix wasn't related to Asna, he wouldn't have made Elder Kraken's life difficult. How do those fallen spirits even come to light? Is there someone responsible? Or the process just happens naturally? Felix asked. The process itself might be natural, but I am certain that someone in the upper echelon is running an underground cartel responsible for this. Miss Sani snickered. As for the reason? You tell me. Felix contemplated about it for a moment before answering. Permanent black spirits mean loyal slaves who don't need to worry anymore about getting kicked out of the realm for eternity. Since they are considered as breaking the rules, those spirits will never snitch, as they will end up forcing the law enforcers and elders to get involved and fix the loophole, which means their permanent stay is over for good. Bingo! 1414 reaching the finals. The Fallen Cartel is selling those specters to their trusted sources as they can be used for the lowest jobs or the highest without worrying about the payment. Miss Sani added, "My investigations have led me to believe that the Fallen Cartel must be sponsored and protected by one of the higher UPS due to their operations being almost non-existent. It must be Kara's previous master, he is a known noble." Felix answered with a serious tone, "She can't give him up, but we can find out about his identity through other means. Most nobles in the city have high governmental positions." Miss Sani frowned. If someone in the government had his hands on this, then it's going to get a lot more complicated. There was no need to ask why, as all of them understood that governmental spirits were considered untouchable by the rest of the spirits. Even Miss Sani, as a gold spirit and a recognized supported detective by the government, would find it extremely challenging to investigate a governmental spirit. The highest position her authority could help her were the company's leaders in the city, even they would be too tough to bring down to justice. "I will do my thing and investigate the noble's identity," Miss Sani said. "You should focus on your tournament for now, as the moment you finish, you will be given cases to handle." "All right." Felix agreed. It was clear that the Fallen Spectre's case was one of the biggest ones for Miss Sani and treated it with great care. There was no way she would let Felix, a completely untrusted rookie, help her out in it before testing him with a much simpler and smaller case first. Felix didn't mind at all, as he also knew that he had to get accustomed to the laws and such before assisting her with the real deal. "I need your help with the tournament." Felix switched the subject with a request. "I need the 3 years payment in advance, plus a loan, and your servant's help. You want to invest everything in improving your spiritual prowess, are you sure it's worth it?" Miss Sani advised. "Boosting your spiritual prowess by that much is useless, considering that you will be winning barely 50,000 Lumis as the champion. Even if you made it to the Heavenly Plains tournament, you will be forced to invest even more, as the fighters there are on a whole different level. Why do you think our city hasn't brought the trophy back home even after such a long time? We might be considered the capital, but there are cities where fighters spend most of their time hunting beasts and exploring the realm's dangers, unlike our fighters. I am confident in my ability, will you help me or not?" Felix replied calmly. While it might seem like Felix was gambling his Lumis on something uncertain, the tournaments were merely a side quest in his eyes. A side quest to earn money and recuperate what was invested in his spiritual prowess. In reality, Felix wanted to improve his soul's strength to an ungodly level, so that when he returned to the living world, his biggest weakness would turn into his biggest strength. Obviously, he had no clue if it was even possible to reincarnate with the same soul or such, but he would be a fool to not prepare for the possibility. "Fine, how much do you need?" Miss Sani asked. 100,000 in total. Sekiro and Kara gasped in shock, and before they could even breathe out, Miss Sani replied, "Fine, that's 72,000 Lumis as a salary and the rest is a loan." Then, she clapped her hands and little Timmy came into the living room, carrying a suitcase. The suitcase seemed to have difficulty containing the illumination of the crystals as the light was piercing through its dark leather. As little Timmy unlatched the suitcase and cracked it open, a chorus of brilliant lights emanated from the nestled crystals inside, bathing the entire living room in a mesmerizing golden glow. Satisfied? Felix nodded and requested her servant, "Take it and spend it entirely on spiritual treasures for the next week." Little Timmy turned his head to Miss Sani and waited for her order. "Go." The moment he received it, he took the suitcase with him and left the apartment, heading to the bazaar. Spending 100,000 Lumis could be considered a lot even if taken Ravager, Goliath, and the other monstrous veterans into consideration. Felix was about to spend close to 200,000 Lumis in less than a month on them. With this boost, he was certain that he wouldn't get manhandled ever again by the likes of Avalanche through telekinesis control. 1 week later, with the tournament in full swing, the onlookers bore witness to a series of intense and fiery battles. Felix managed to outshine and outperform in each round, as the following bouts were against relatively weaker opponents compared to Avalanche. With Felix's relentless spirit and ingenious use of his unique abilities, he was the first to ensure his place in the upcoming finals. I think you should take a look at it. Simultaneously, in the parallel half of the tournament, Goliath was pitted against Ravager. This was a clash of the titans, but much to the audience's surprise, Ravager displayed dominating prowess. He dominated Goliath, effortlessly bridging the perceived gap between him and the rest of the contenders, marking a decisive victory that left spectators in a state of shocked silence. As the dust of the semi-finals settled, only 2 combatants remained standing: Felix, the dark horse who came out of nowhere, and Ravager, the cold and undeniable champion. The stage was set for the final battle, a mere day away, with the audience on the edge of their seats. The majority of the crowd had their bets placed on Ravager, given his dominating performance against Goliath, but there was a certain air of unpredictability, which made many opportunity-seeking viewers wager on Felix in hopes of striking it big. While everyone was holding their breaths in anticipation and hype for tomorrow, Mr. Atticus was seen sitting on a noble chair that oozed with royal elegance. In front of him, the known formidable champion Ravager was sitting on the floor with his head lowered akin to an obedient pet. This should have been impossible when considering that Ravager was also a golden spirit, which meant he was no one's servant. "How certain are you of winning tomorrow?" Mr. Atticus inquired calmly, taking a small sip from a cup of tea. 100%, Ravager replied, his tone filled with nothing but absolute confidence. His confidence wasn't based on pride or arrogance. But, in Felix's latest 2 battles, the fighters might have been relatively weaker than Avalanche, but after showing most of his trump cards and weaknesses, even those fighters had made him work for his victory. When he watched him struggle against them, his interest died down and he became certain of his victory. "It's good to be confident, but don't get too cocky," Mr. Atticus warned. "I have placed close to 500,000 Loomis on you, you know what will happen to our agreement if you lost." "I understand." While the odds were in favor of Ravager, there was still plenty to gain if one made certain to wager a decent amount of money on him. "You are excused." With a head nod, Ravager stood up and flew away, his expression still as cold as ever, but in the depth of his eyes, an untold amount of rage was hidden. "Just wait a little longer, I am getting closer and closer," he thought to himself as a picture of a beautiful girl that resembled him greatly surfaced in his mind. While most fighters participate in those tournaments for money, he was doing it for the sake of saving his little sister. His little sister was turned into a permanent servant under Mr. Atticus, and unless he gave up on her, no one had any right to take her away, not even her brother. In the spirit realm, it was more than possible to give birth to new spirits just like in the living world. The only difference was that those newborn spirits weren't given personalities and memories, leaving the job to the parents to take care of it. Both Ravager and his sister were born in the heavenly realm and had no connection with the living world at all. Because of this, they had no achievements that could be translated into a better color. So, the moment they were born, they were given a standard indigo color and it was up to the parents to protect them from getting thrown out. Unfortunately, not everyone was up to such a massive responsibility, and both Ravager and his sister ended up on the streets after their parents lost their jobs and failed to pay the rent in time. The heavenly plane was even more vicious to the homeless, as the daily penalty was the biggest contributor to spirits getting thrown out. When Ravager's parents realized that their children would be getting kicked out first, they sold them in the servants' markets at dirt cheap prices, just to secure their stay in the realm. That's when Ravager and his sister first got separated, and for the past 100 years, he had no clue about her owner until the past decade. The moment he found her, he reached out to Mr. Atticus to buy her for a price 10 times more worth than her. Alas, Mr. Atticus found out through his connections about their relationship and took advantage of Ravager's desperation. He told him the only way to free his sister was through winning the Heavenly Plains tournament while being sponsored by him. After an untold amount of training and failures, he finally made a name for himself and got closer and closer to his goal. With this kind of motivation and pressure, he would rather go through hell back and forth than allow himself to fall under Felix in tomorrow's finals. 1415 The Traveler vs Ravager. Meanwhile, in the living world. In the heart of a secret, underground lab, hidden from prying eyes and filled with state-of-the-art equipment, Lady Sphinx moved with an air of somber determination. The room was bathed in sterile, white light, highlighting the endless rows of gleaming machinery and complex circuitry. In the center of the lab was a large medical pod, almost ethereal with its soft, blue light illuminating the room. Inside, floating in a sea of preserving liquid, was Felix's lifeless body. His once vibrant, brown eyes were closed, his strong, scarred physique at rest. The pod was surrounded by screens that showed a vast amount of data. This included the fluctuations of his weak heartbeat and the careful maintenance of his cells. Every second of data was crucial, a silent testament to the man who once roamed free and conquered the universe. "Kraken, how is it going in there?" she asked. "He has just reached the finals in the tournament and Asna is still residing in a private palace under Lord Hade's protection," Elder Kraken informed after receiving the news from his main consciousness. "It's been more than a decade here and he has yet to complete 2 months there." Lady Sphinx frowned, not too pleased with the current time difference. The time difference between the spirit realm and the living world was random and ever-changing. At the moment, it was against Felix. After all, it would be meaningless to return if the entire universe had entered a new era and everyone in the UVR era had become dust beside the immortals. "All we can do is hope for the shift to happen soon." Thor sighed. "I never thought I would miss a kid before, but spending an entire decade without him and Asna is quite boring." Carbuncle confessed, pushing smoke rings in the direction of Lord Shiva to irritate him. Lord Shiva expressed his opinion on the matter, stating, "What would be the purpose of bringing him? He will perish just as quickly." "This again? Didn't we tell you to save your pessimistic view to yourself?" Thor got annoyed. Who could blame him? Ever since Lord Shiva was revived, he seemed to have completely given up the idea that Felix could dethrone those beings. In his eyes, the moment someone gets targeted by them, their visa in the universe had expired. "I am just saying, right this instant, they can be watching us, waiting for the looks on our faces when they kill him the moment we finally bring him back." Lord Shiva opened a magazine and read it lazily. "I ain't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing that. How useless, I don't know why Sphinx even bothered to bring you back." Thor clicked his tongue in criticism. Lord Shiva ignored him and continued reading his magazine. "Let's bring him back first and see what happens." Hormungandr glanced at Lady Sphinx and inquired, "By the way, have you reached out to Lord Quetzalcoatl yet?" "No, he is still missing and Lord Osiris Death Strings can't work on him." Lady Sphinx shook her head. "Plan B depends on him heavily. I wish he shows up sooner than later." "Him showing up isn't the problem, it's whether he will accept your preposterous request." Lord Loki jumped in, his tone was as playful as ever. "We still haven't used the ticket he gave us, we can only try our best to convince him." Lady Sphinx said. "Let's hope for the best." Back to the heavenly plane, the next morning. In the heart of the colossal Colosseum, an immense crowd sat in electrifying anticipation. Their roars of excitement shook the very foundation of the arena as they awaited the spectacle that was about to unfold. The climax of the tournament had arrived. The final duel between Felix and Ravager. And now, the host's voice simmered down to a crackle, tantalizing the audience with anticipation, a fighter who emerged from the shadows, a dark horse who trampled expectations and forged a path in this tournament that none of us saw coming. He let the silence stretch, the excitement in the crowd palpable, his determination has moved mountains, his courage faced the fiercest of foes. The brilliance of his strategy, the unyielding resilience of his spirit, earned him a place in this final. Again, Mr. Sawgrass paused, his gaze locked on Felix, carrying the powers of sound and fire, a man who stood against the storm, a fighter whose very existence is defiance. I present to you, the one who beat the odds, the traveler. I think you should take a look at. Whoa! Clap clap clap! And then, as if a giant had struck the earth, the crowd erupted, a thunderous cheer that filled the Colosseum. There was excitement, awe, curiosity, and perhaps even a hint of fear in their eyes. But Felix, like a tranquil sea amidst a raging storm, walked in a calm and composed manner in the direction of the arena. He was carrying behind him a standard silver hammer, a unique weapon of choice in the eyes of the viewers. Next, Mr. Sawgrass introduced the Ravager, giving him the same love and hype as Felix. Allow me to introduce to you a man whose very name sends shivers down the spines of the bravest fighters. A man whose power is as relentless as the storm and as unpredictable as wildfire. A man who has climbed to the top, overcoming every challenge, every obstacle, like they were mere pebbles in his path. With a heart crafted from the flames of adversity, and a will as resolute as the mountains, I present to you, the embodiment of sheer dominance. Ravager. The crowd erupted into deafening applause, their voices united in a single monstrous roar that echoed through the vast expanses of the Colosseum. As the sound waves crashed over him, Ravager remained unfazed, his icy eyes meeting Felix's across the arena, a silent declaration of the impending epic clash. It's best if you surrendered and saved both of our times. Ravager spoke calmly, you have already earned a decent reward and a qualification slot to the heavenly plane by being second. I could say the same to you, Felix replied nonchalantly. If that's how you feel, don't blame me for what happens next. With that being said, the Ravager kept his mouth shut and entered his battle stance. The air in the Colosseum was saturated with anticipation as both combatants squared off. Felix's figure radiated an ember-like glow, his vibration abilities subtly rippling the air around him while Ravager seemed to embody the elements he commanded, a tempestuous whirlwind of water, wind, and fire swirling about his form. All set. Mr. Sawgrass glanced at them both for a moment before yelling, fight! Whoosh! Ravager was the first to make a action as he raised his hands, beginning the elemental dance. Aqua Torrent! He uttered, sending a colossal wave of water cascading towards Felix, its sheer mass promising to crush him. But Felix was ready. Vibration dissipation. He chanted to himself, channeling his energy, he sent a series of tremors into the ground, creating barriers of vibrating air that parted the water around him, turning Ravager's tidal wave into innocuous streams that pooled at the edges of the arena. Taking advantage of Ravager's momentary pause, Felix retaliated. Inferno burst. His hands, glowing bright red, shot fireballs that hurtled toward Ravager with intense heat. Ravager swiftly countered, a powerful gust encircled him, diverting the fireballs away. The audience gasped as the diverted flames formed a fiery ring around the perimeter of the battlefield. Ravager wasn't going to give Felix an instant to rest. Whipping his hands in a fluid motion, he merged his mastery over wind and fire to summon a twister of flames that he directed toward Felix. Felix braced himself. His entire being hummed as he emitted a barrier of anti-elemental vibrations, neutralizing the blazing tornado and causing it to spiral upwards and dissipate in a shower of embers. Seeing an opening, Felix initiated his next move. He thrust his palm forward, sending a focused vibration beam toward Ravager. Ravager, not to be outdone, deftly responded with a thick water barrier that not only absorbed Felix's attack but refracted it in multiple directions, making it harmless. With that, both parties seemed to have come to an understanding that simple long-range attacks weren't going to work on their opponent. Time to end this. So, Ravager decided to tap into Felix's weakness right away, not in the mood to fool around. 1416 The Traveler vs Ravager. 2. Ravager's eyes sparkled with resolve as he raised both his hands, focusing his spiritual energy on his opponent. His fingers danced, pulling invisible strings as he engaged his telekinesis. The air between them crackled, becoming dense as if squeezed by an unseen force, and around Felix, invisible hands reached out, attempting to constrict his movements, compress his form, and assert Ravager's dominance. "It's done." Boss Alves smirked, believing that there was no way a newbie was going to defend against Ravager's telekinesis prowess. Just like Mr. Atticus, he had also put a decent amount of money into Ravager's victory after his sponsored fighter dropped out in the semi-finals at the hands of Felix. Just as his peers were about to break into wide smiles, Felix's own telekinetic energy flared, a vibrant, pulsing aura enveloping him. The two opposing forces clashed in a silent war, straining against each other in a tense, vibrating deadlock. The ground beneath them rippled with the energy and the audience gasped in awe, watching the display of sheer power. Despite the intensity of Ravager's assault, Felix's telekinetic barrier held strong, an unyielding shield against the relentless pressure. Impossible! The Ravager's eyes widened in shock as he could feel that Felix's defenses might not be the best, but they helped him avoid complete domination like what happened against Avalanche. This was what made him even more surprised as he knew that his telekinesis control was better than Avalanche. How could he have increased his spiritual prowess so soon? Boss Alves and his peers' expressions turned ugly immediately as it made them understand that someone must have helped Felix with buying spiritual treasures. They knew that it would be impossible for Felix to get this strong through the black market as he had to pay close to $500,000 worth of spiritual treasures. "Kikiki, good job, good job, I have placed a huge bet on you, don't be disappointing me now." The culprit Miss Sani was seen amidst the audience laughing to herself and scaring the viewers next to her with her creepy laugh. "Shall we continue?" Felix said coldly as he extended his arm and made it seem like he was holding a sniper rifle in the direction of Ravager. His arm hummed with vibrational energy, and a glow of red, orange, and yellow hinted at the fire element mingling within. He took aim, his eyes fixed on Ravager, and as he pulled the imaginary trigger, destructive bullets erupted from the tip of his finger. Whoosh! Whoosh! These projectiles were more than mere bullets, each contained a volatile mix of fire and vibration, promising an explosive end upon contact. Ravager moved with speed that was a blur, narrowly dodging the first few shots, his agility on full display. Boom! 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 However, the resulting explosions that erupted in the wake of the bullets were far-reaching and brutal. The concussive force buffeted against his telekinetic barrier, each impact threatening to shatter his defenses. Realizing the scale of the threat, Ravager made his move. His hands swiftly formed a complex gesture, and in response, water surged from his form, twisting and spiraling into a formidable water tornado. The swirling vortex of water moved to meet the explosive bullets head-on, absorbing the brunt of the explosions and dissipating the vibrational energy within. The water tornado acted as a formidable barrier, but the continuous onslaught from Felix's sniper arm pushed it to its limits. A bit more, just a little more. Unbeknownst to Ravager, Felix was dissipating most of the vibration inside his body through the underground as tremors, building up for something much more destructive while he was occupied with his bullets. The moment Felix began to sense that his vibrations were covering the entire half of the arena before him, his eyes flared with resolve as he stopped his endless assault and slammed his hands onto the ground. Rumble! A shockwave of vibrational energy rushed outwards. The force was so strong, so violent that the very arena around them split cleanly into two halves yet again, causing a rumble of terror and excitement to ripple through the spectators. He broke it again. Will he bury him as well? I think you should take a look at it. While the viewers assumed that Felix would use the same strategy against Avalanche, he took off into the air. With a swift upward sweep of his hands, he manipulated his newly empowered telekinesis, lifting the enormous chunk of the split arena into the air. The sight was breathtaking, displaying the sheer power and dominance he held over his abilities, but no one knew that there was a great sense of pressure and pain behind Felix's stoic expression. Lifting half of the arena wasn't easy in the slightest. What is he up to? Ravager narrowed his eyes in focus at the sight of Felix pulling the silver hammer from his back. Before he could react, Felix brought it crashing down onto the levitated half of the arena. Rumble. The collision was cataclysmic, causing the giant mass to shatter instantly into a storm of rubble, boulders, and debris, turning Ravager's side of the sky into a treacherous minefield. Felix chose a hammer as his tool because of its compatibility with his vibration element. While everyone was left stunned at the destructive scene, the hammer did nothing but trigger the vibration across the elevated half of the arena. Here I come! Without wasting a second, Felix propelled himself forward, closing the distance between himself and Ravager in the blink of an eye while the sky rained rocks around them. Felix engaged Ravager, swinging his massive hammer with a combination of brute strength and delicate precision, each move calculated and lethal. With his eyes locked onto his opponent, Felix's mind was a whirl of tactical calculations. His gaze swept over the myriad of boulders and debris scattered around him, their chaotic disorder turned into weapons with his elemental control. Felix spread his arms wide, calling upon his oscillation abilities. A hum of power radiated from him, vibrating the air around him and causing the surrounding rubble to tremble in resonance. Then, with a sweeping motion of his arms, Felix launched the vibrating debris into Ravager. Every stone, every shard of debris began to pulsate with a powerful rhythm, imbued with Felix's vibrational energy. They shot forward like missiles, cutting through the air with deadly precision toward Ravager. As they neared their target, Felix increased the frequency of their vibrations, causing them to emit an ear-piercing whine before striking with the strength of a mini-explosion upon contact. Enough! In the middle of the relentless assault from Felix, Ravager's countenance hardened. His usually cool demeanor flared with fierce determination as he decided to put an conclude to the barrage. Ravager planted his feet solidly on the ground, drawing upon his dual elements of wind and fire. The arena filled with an escalating roar as the wind began to swirl around him, picking up heat as the fiery essence was infused into it. His hands glowed with a bright, sizzling aura, the combination of the two elements creating a volatile power ready to be unleashed. And then, with a forceful wave of his hands, he discharged the built-up energy. A wave of searing hot wind expanded outwards from him, carrying with it the intensity of a wild inferno. The wave collided with the onslaught of debris, and the resulting explosion was a spectacle of pure elemental might. Boom! Each stone, each piece of debris caught in the explosion was instantly reduced to sand, scattering into the wind. *T. The sheer strength of the explosion threw Felix off balance, propelling him backward through the air like a ragdoll. He crashed into the ground several times before using 2 fire jets from his palms to decrease his momentum. The moment he stopped, the audience gasped collectively at the sight of him being merely 1 meter away from getting kicked out of the arena's premises. After the dust settled, silence covered the Colosseum as neither Felix nor Ravager made another move. They merely stood at the edges of the arena with stoic and cold expressions, staring at each other and calculating the best way to defeat their opponent. How do I eliminate this monster? How do I eliminate this freak of nature? For once, they shared the same thought. 1417 The Traveler vs Ravager. 3. Ravager would be lying if he said that he wasn't in a pinch. He was depending on ending the battle swiftly through his telekinesis control. Unfortunately, Felix's monstrous upgrade foiled his strategy. Now, he had to treat this battle just like the one with Goliath. The only difference was that Felix proved to be 10 times much tougher to crack. I have to go all out and use my new ultimate ability, there is no other way. Ravager narrowed his eyes coldly in the direction of Felix as he prepared to use his final attack. An attack he spent years trying to master for the sake of using it to clutch the championship in the Heavenly Plains tournament. He wanted to save it until then, but he understood that if he lost this battle, he would never hear the end of it from Mr. Atticus. Whoosh! The tension in the air suddenly spiked, and the audience held their collective breath as Ravager's body lit up in a riot of colors. The sky darkened ominously, and a powerful gust of wind swirled around him, lifting him off the ground. Traveler! Ravager's voice echoed throughout the silent arena, each syllable carried by the wind that was rapidly picking up speed. You should feel honored to be in the presence of my first ultimate ability, Elemental Triad, Inferno Cyclone Tsunami. As the words left his lips, fire erupted from Ravager's body, enveloping him in a massive pillar of flames that reached skywards. The fire took on a life of its own, twisting and spiraling around Ravager like a swirling, searing tornado. The flames danced and crackled with a life of their own, their intense heat warping the air around them. Suddenly, from the eye of the fire tornado, a column of water shot forth, spiraling upward into the sky before cascading down like a waterfall, adding another layer of devastation to Ravager's onslaught. The heat of the fire turned the cascading water into steam, blanketing the entire arena in a thick, scalding fog. Ravager was in the eye of the chaos, his silhouette barely visible through the haze of steam, the flickering flames, and the cascading waterfall. His arms were stretched wide as if controlling the maelstrom around him, his eyes glowing intensely as he poured every ounce of his power into the ultimate combination of his elemental abilities. A loose use of the term ultimate, but it doesn't seem like a weak ability. In the face of imminent destruction, Felix's face remained stoic. He closed his eyes, focusing all his energy. The ground vibrated under him, resonating with his energy. Anti-elemental vibration barrier. He yelled, his voice strong against the tempest. A spherical barrier materialized around Felix, flickering with translucent energy, trembling under the force of Ravager's attack. As the cyclone of fire and water crashed against his defense, Felix's barrier vibrated violently, trying to match the frequencies of the elements and neutralize them. However, the sheer intensity of Ravager's attack was too much. Felix grimaced as his barrier started to crack, the vibration unable to negate all the energy from the onslaught. With a deafening crash, the vibration barrier was broken. **T. Felix tightened his fists and smashed them on the ground to get better stability against the raging tempest. It was threatening to kick him out of the arena's boundary and he refused to lose in that manner. The traveler is risking going through a world of agony to keep himself in the fight. Mr. Soglus commentated out loud. Crack crack. Because Felix decided to fight off the tempest, his telekinesis barrier was the first to eat the whole brunt of the attack, cracking rapidly and showing spreading fissures across Felix's entire body. Even with Felix's upgraded spiritual prowess, his barrier was sadly unmatched against this kind of destruction. In a few moments at best, it shattered as well and finally left Felix to face the wrath of the infernal storm with nothing but his iron will. Ugh! Felix grunted silently in pain as his skin began to burn off and receive sharp cuts from the wind, leaving him bleeding from new spots each second gone by. In the heavenly plains battles, there was no such thing as elemental resistance that enabled one to be completely immune to elements from all sources. Everyone could get burnt off, poisoned, frozen, smashed, and the list goes on. Since death wasn't an option, the worst that could happen was reaching a level of pain that forced one to pass out. So, even when Felix was using fire abilities, he was still getting burnt off by Ravager. 1 hit, 2 hits, 5 hits, 10 hits. How long can you last? Boss Alves snickered with the rest of his peers who were already cheering on a well-earned profit from their massive wagers. Master, please be safe. Meanwhile, Kura and Sekiro weren't loving the sight before them that much. Kura was praying each moment while Sekiro was silently watching his master struggle with a solemn expression. He knew that his master had invested too much in this to return with nothing below 50,000 lumus. 12 hits, 13 hits. I have to do something. I think you should take a look at. While the pain clouded his mind a bit, Felix was still sensible enough to know that he was nearing the hit limit and there was no way the storm was going to end before he clock off. So, he sent his brain into overdrive, thinking, and brainstorming, to come out with a plan, a strategy, anything to help him off. I need something powerful and explosive to counteract the tempest momentum while at the same time not too destructive to ruin the arena. The first thought that came into Felix's mind was the same suicidal explosion he used against Avalanche, but he understood that if he used it, there was a high chance he would end up outside of the arena. After all, he was barely holding into the ground and it was already starting to crack and show signs of giving up to the infernal storm. If he went with something that destructive, it wouldn't end well for him. When his mind wandered in the direction of explosiveness but at the same time not producing equal damage, he reached a sub-perfect solution. I need to use sound to my advantage. It's not guaranteed to work, but I don't have time to complain. 16 hit. Only 4 registered powerful direct hits remained and Felix knew that he had merely a few seconds at best before they get registered. In the heavenly plane, hits registration depends on the damage and pain they cause to the target. Because Felzy's pain tolerance was so freaking high, he lasted much further than most spirits. I have to harness the noise around me as they are mere vibrations in the wind. Felix honed his senses on the frenzied, resonating noises around him, the vibrations of elemental fury that filled the air. He ignored his injuries, the pain, and everything else, drawing in the rampant vibrations and containing them around him. This created a bizarre scene under the baffled looks of the viewers. Am I the only one who stopped hearing the storm? Why did everything go so quiet all of a sudden? Am I tripping? The raging noisy infernal tempest was now as quiet as a forest after midnight, making everyone believe that they must have gone deaf or something. But in reality, all the sounds produced by the raging storms were absorbed by Felix until his body seemed to be vibrating with the untapped power. The focus of vibrational energy within him reached a peak, a pulsating orb of pure force that seemed ready to rupture. Release. Then, with a raw, primal shout that resounded thunderously in this uncanny silence, a deadly shockwave erupted from Felix's form, its oscillation frequency so high it broke the sound barrier with a thunderous crack, rolling outwards in a rapidly expanding circle. The shockwave ripped through the air, an unstoppable force that collided head-on with Ravager's Inferno Cyclone Tsunami. Boom! The collision was catastrophic. The shockwave, imbued with the power of Felix's concentrated vibration, tore through Ravager's supreme ability, scattering the elements. The flame in the cyclone was extinguished, the wind was silenced, and the tsunami dissolved, the devastating attack neutralized in an instant by Felix's shocking counter. What the? Hey! Impossible! The arena was left in stunned silence as the echoes of the clash slowly faded away, revealing Felix standing tall amidst the chaos, battered but unbowed. A number 19 was written on red above his head, but his bloodied face displayed not an ounce of fear, nervousness, or worry. He merely lifted his head and eyed the stunned Ravager with the coldest stare he could muster. That's all you got? He taunted, his ragged appearance betraying his absolute confidence. Yet, Ravager actually felt a chill course down his spine as the predatory look in Felix's eyes made him understand that this fight wasn't close to being over. Get a hold of yourself. He has a mere one more hit and his telekinesis barrier is already down. Still, Ravager didn't allow his emotions to get the best of him as the stakes were too high to fail. You have earned my respect, but for the sake of my beloved, you have to bow down today, Ravager replied coldly, his hands reaching out to his pockets and bringing out 2 small daggers. It was clear, with Felix only having one more hit before his elimination, Ravager wanted to finish him off up close. Bring it on! Felix challenged, bleeding out of his mouth and nose, but still, he strolled forward while cracking his bloodied knuckles. 1418 The Traveler vs Ravager. 4. Felix clutched his vibration-infused hammer as he increased his speed, turning his walk into a jog, before finally going full sprint in the direction of Ravager. On the other side, Ravager tightened his grip on his trio. Elemental daggers. Not wanting to fight amidst the destroyed side of the arena, Ravager took flight and charged at Felix, his daggers glinting menacingly under the harsh light. His telekinesis barrier will take time to recover, this is my only chance to end this. I just need one strike. His fuel must be tanking after that ultimate ability, I just need to break his telekinesis barrier and he will be a sitting pig for slaughter. Both fighters had their own thoughts on how to end the fight and they revolved their strategy around it. Felix was sure that Ravager's energy was low because he was using physical daggers instead of bombarding him with elemental abilities. Just like in the living world, the moment a fighter exhausts his energy, he would be done for a while. Rumble. With a feral grunt, Felix swung his hammer, sending a wave of ground-shattering vibration toward Ravager. Ravager reacted swiftly and evaded the attack by using his wind element, boosting his speed up a notch. With a swift motion, he hurled a fire-infused dagger toward Felix. A sizzling sound filled the air as the weapon cut through it, heading straight for its target. Felix calculated its trajectory and distance, then swung his hammer at it, hitting it right at the tip, creating a sparkle. Whoosh! A hammer vs dagger, there was no debate on which one received most of the damage as the dagger flew with an even faster speed back to Ravager. Cling! Ravager blocked the dagger with the second one and captured it mid-air before continuing his charge. The moment he arrived next to Felix, he danced aside with lightning reflexes, leaving Felix to swing at thin air with his giant hammer. Whoosh! The force behind the swing threw Felix slightly off balance, and Ravager seized the opportunity, lunging with his twin daggers at his backside. Felix barely had time to recover, feeling the whoosh of the twin blades slicing through the air, dangerously close to his torso. Vibration blast! A shockwave of vibration erupted from Felix's back and landed on the twin daggers, halting Ravager's momentum for a moment. This allowed Felix to pivot swiftly, adjusting his grip on the hammer, and swung it in a wide arc towards Ravager, forcing him to retreat. Not one to back down, Ravager came at Felix again, moving with a lethal combination of agility and precision. He kept aiming at Felix's unprotected sides, but Felix's battle experience was leagues above him, making him feel like it was impossible to touch him. Fall! Fall! Foul! As his attacks got frenzied and more deadly, he was starting to lose his precision and Felix kept on the defense, using his hammer as a shield against the daggers. Cling! Cling! Sparks flew everywhere as each clash between those weapons resulted in loud metallic clings that seemed to die off in noise abnormally. But not everyone paid any attention to this small detail as they were captivated by the exciting close-ranged dance between those two experienced fighters. I still need more, I need enough to end this fight once and for all. Felix's narrowed eyes were affixed on Ravager's rapid daggers, tracing their trajectory akin to a hawk to be able to block them off with his hammer. For minutes on end, their battle raged, their weapons clashed, sparks flying with each strike. Sweat trickled down their faces, and their breaths came in ragged pants, but neither showed any sign of relenting. I can't hit him, I actually can't hit him even once, what kind of monstrous battle experience is this? Ravager's blood ran cold at the notion that the fight would end in Felix's favor if the battle lasted in this manner. He was growing tired and his energy was closer than ever to depletion. While Felix seemed to be just as tired, his predatory eyes were as focused as ever, sending shivers down Ravager's spine. I can't falter here. I am so close. I can't. With a deafening roar, Ravager charged yet again at Felix, and this time he was harnessing the power of the wind to boost his attacks. Alas! I think you should take a look at it. It's time to end this. With a swift, deceptive movement, Felix feinted a swing at Ravager. Predictably, Ravager moved to evade, but Felix had anticipated this. Swiveling on his heel, he redirected his hammer's trajectory and sent it hurtling toward Ravager's exposed flank. Ravager didn't have time to react and knew that the hammer was going to land on him. However, instead of panicking, he was already thinking of a counterattack. My telekinesis barrier will block the force, I can use the momentary opening from the swing to finish him. And so, he watched as the hammer hit him directly on the center of his back. Just as he wanted to suck up the incoming pain and counterattack, a sudden powerful vibrational shockwave discharged from the surface of the hammer. Boom! Shatter! With a thunderous boom, the telekinesis barrier exploded into invisible pieces and Ravager was sent flying off his feet akin to being launched by a slinger. The audience gasped collectively, their eyes widened as they watched Ravager's body drawing a high parabola in the air, heading straight for the outer boundary of the arena. Mr. Atticus and his peers' hearts came to a sudden stop as their enlarged pupils followed the trajectory of Ravager, feeling like they were in a dream. How? Even the Ravager had absolutely no idea what happened, as he couldn't fathom that a hammer could carry such an overwhelming punch. Unbeknownst to him, Felix was absorbing all the vibration resulting from their clashes inside his hammer and released at once. Who cares about how? I can't falter here. However, Ravager was not ready to concede defeat as the image of his dear little sister surfaced in his mind, waking him up from his stupor. Halt! Struggling to right himself in mid-air, he summoned every iota of his elemental prowess, using fire/water to provide a counter-thrust and wind to alter his trajectory. But the force of Felix's hammer was too strong and he still lacked the proper fuel to change his fate. In the end, despite a gallant effort, the elemental defenses buckled and Ravager, unable to stop his trajectory, crashed into the protective barrier at the edge of the arena before rolling out onto the ground beyond the boundary line. I lost. Ravager muttered. The massive contusion on his back didn't hurt as much as the thought of Mr. Atticus venting his anger on his little sister in the shadows. Alas, no one cared about his feelings or troubles as the audience exploded into a thunderous roar of applause and cheers a moment later. Ravager lost. The 2 times reigning champion lost. Holy shit, I just made a fortune. While the bulk of the viewers were cheering in excitement, almost 99% of the bettors felt their souls leave their bodies as they eyed Felix standing in the center of the arena, leaning against his hammer as support. His victory was secured against all odds and he had to work his hardest to achieve it, but those bettors wanted nothing more but to rip his throat out at this very moment. Especially Mother*****. I just lost $250,000 in one sitting. Furious and frustrated, Boss Gideon threw a glass of wine into the window, breaking it into fragments. I can't believe this, did we lose? Did we really just lose to a nobody? Meanwhile, Lady Iris and Madame Arabella might be soft spoken, but they were struck just as hard as Boss Gideon. Yet, no one was struck as hard as Mr. Atticus. He could be seen grabbing into the armchair with his hands tightly until the armchair began making noise. Unforgivable, $500,000 was thrown down the drain, unforgivable. He uttered in his mind while staring daggers at both his representative and Felix. $500,000 was the supreme prize in the heavenly tournament and Mr. Atticus had lost it in one sitting. It could be uttered to be the dumbest decision to bet such a heavy amount for the sake of winning a mere 100,000 lumus, but one would argue that it was stupid only the results weren't already predetermined. In this case, Mr. Atticus had full confidence in Ravager to defeat Felix as he had invested pretty heavily in him. So, putting $500,000 or an entire million didn't bother him as he always knew that it would return to him with extra bonus. He made a fortune doing the same in the past 2 years, alas, he was awakened from the dream at last by the hands of Felix. On the other side of the spectrum. Kikiki. Kikiki. I am starting to think that it's best to sell the bureau and bet everything on my lucky charm. 1419 The Heavenly Plains Tournament. Felix didn't know why, but he suddenly felt goosebumps across his skin like something bad was going to happen. Whatever. He raised his guard for a moment before dropping it after the feeling went away. Probably, Miss Sani had come to her senses and dropped that lunatic thought. Felix lifted his hammer with great difficulty and strolled away with his back facing Ravager, not bothering to comfort him on his loss. He rarely did this even when he was nice. Now that he was as cold as a piece of ice, this entire fight was just business to him. Wait, Sir Traveller, there is still the victory ceremony to be held. Mr. Sawgrass came down next to Felix and murmured near his ears after spotting him getting closer to the edge of the arena. Not interested, send me my reward at this address. Not bothering to stop for even a moment, Felix placed Miss Sani's card inside Mr. Sagra's suit pocket and continued on his path. Mr. Sagrus glanced at the card and then at Felix's back, feeling like he had to do something to stop him from leaving. But, when he saw the heat coming from Felix's body and the blood trail he was leaving behind him, he had a change of heart. Delivery is good too. He gulped a mouthful and returned to his audience, knowing that he had to work extra hard to keep them around for the ceremony without the champion. Alas, just as he turned in the direction of Ravager, the words were caught in his mouth after noticing that he had gone missing. Mother ****. Can't one do his job in peace? With the champion and the runner-up both missing, Mr. Sagrus decided to skip the entire ceremony and spot the light on the Heavenly Plains tournament. With the 3 qualifiers being decided to be the Traveler, Ravager, and Goliath, our city could be uttered to be stronger than ever. I don't realize about you guys, but I have a strong feeling that we will make it past the semi-finals this year. Past the semi-finals? Let's hope they can secure their spots in 16 single elimination stages first. One of the spectators scoffed. How can you be this pessimistic after watching this epic final? The spirit next to him gave him an unfriendly look. You must be new. You don't realize how difficult the Heavenly Plains tournament is. Even the strongest can get eliminated before reaching the top 16 due to the Great Filter Stage. The Great Filter Stage. The spectator was indeed a new arriving spirit and this was his first time watching a tournament. Before his seat neighbor could explain it to him, Mr. Sagrus brought it out on his own. The Heavenly Plains tournament will begin in 6 months. Just like each year, all the qualified fighters from the hundreds of cities around the realm will have complete freedom to eliminate any fighter they desire. This was called the Great Filter Stage for a reason, as there was no way a tournament could be held with close to 1,000 fighters across the entire Heavenly Plane. To make matters more interesting, the government had decided to turn the entire Heavenly Plane into an open battlefield for only those qualified fighters. The only limited areas were the cities and that's all. The contestants could even decide to group up in private territory and wage war against each other if they wanted, since all the damages would be paid in full by the government. Since the cities could be considered safe spaces from the battlefield, there were plenty of rookie contestants whose first thought would be to hole up in them to avoid the battles. Alas, the only method for the fighters to secure their spot in the top 16 was by eliminating as many fighters as possible. That's because of a point system that rewarded a point for each fighter eliminated, and the 16 contestants with the highest points during those 6 months would be chosen. In other words, everyone would be more than motivated to get out of their cities and hunt other contestants. As most of you know, all fighters will be allowed to use GPS in their crystal devices to track the location of their opponents. Mr. Sagrus rubbed his hands together excitedly. We will have a direct live streaming of each fight happening across the entire realm. I think you should take a look at. Clap. 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 The audience rejoiced and applauded until their hands grew red at the kind of excitement and drama awaiting them in those inter-city fights. Each year, the Heavenly Plains tournament has close to 80% of the spirits following its event due to how massive it was. Even if someone had no interest in fights, he would still tune in to watch for the sake of joining the festivities and having a sense of pride for their city. This kind of attraction was the reason why all the companies waste so much of their resources on sponsored fighters. The kind of visibility their products and companies would receive was nothing like anything else. Mr. Atticus knew this very well, and that's why, even though he was seething internally after losing $500,000 in the wager, he had no plans to make his only sponsored fighter lose focus. Our deal was for you to win the Heavenly Plane tournament and give exposure to my company plus 50% of the reward. Now, it's 100%, you will pay what you lost me in full. Mr. Atticus uttered coldly as he stared at Ravager, who was kowtowing to him with his forehead affixed on the floor. I understand. Ravager replied, his voice softer than usual. While the punishment was too much, he was merely relieved that Mr. Atticus wasn't going to vent his anger on his sister. You better prepare well for the tournament, don't show me such a disgraceful result again. Mr. Atticus warned with a glacial stare, this is your last chance. Ravager flinched, but he still showed his understanding with a head nod. Scram! The moment he was given permission, he stood up and flew away immediately, wanting to throw himself into training again. As he was flying away, Felix's face popped up in his mind. This freak appeared out of nowhere and in less than a month became the city's champion. Ravager narrowed his eyes solemnly. Now that he was given 6 months, he is bound to emerge even more fearsome. Although Felix caused his defeat, Ravager didn't harbor an ounce of hatred toward him. Instead, he felt even more motivated to improve himself and break his limits, realizing that his current strength wasn't enough to win the Heavenly Plains finals. Traveler, just wait, I will come stronger than ever and show you that defeating me was your biggest mistake, just wait. Back in Miss Sanny's bureau, Felix could be seen sitting on the living room floor while Kura was cleaning what remained of his wounds. In the spirit realm, fighters' rejuvenation depends on their spiritual energy, and if they wasted it all while being heavily injured, they would have some pretty nasty hours to spend. Ka-thump! Suddenly, the door was opened barbarically, slamming against the door, causing Kura to jolt out of her place in fright. Traveler! My sweet little assistant! Come give me mommy a kiss! Miss Sanny rushed through the door with a wide gleeful smile, showing her tiny fangs. Don't touch me! Felix stared in her direction indifferently the moment she was about to give him a hug. Miss Sanny froze in her posture before pulling back with an upset look. How can you reject such a beauty? I have plenty of suitors, I let you know. More like enemies. Felix sneered and turned on the TV, wanting to see if the rules for the Heavenly Tournament were about to be released. He already knew the known ones, but there were plenty of instances where the rules had some changes. Tisk, you might have lucked out with fighting traits, but your sh*TTY personality makes up for your luck. Miss Sanny clacked her tongue in annoyance and sat next to them, eyeing the news as well. Felix ignored her and increased the volume after seeing the replay of his fight being played on the Heavenly Plane Tournament main channel. A new dark horse has risen from the capital city. Will this year finally have our beloved capital snatch the crown from the Northern Lights City? The reporter disclosed passionately. The Northern Lights City, looks like the 3 usual suspects, Zephyr, Nebula, and Evergreen are representing it again. Sekiro uttered with a deep frown. How strong are they exactly? Felix asked calmly. He didn't bother to check the Heavenly Plains tournament fighters before since he barely had time to prepare for the local one. To put it into a better perspective. Sekiro turned to Felix and uttered with a deadly serious expression, the weakest of them is 2 times stronger than Ravager. 1420 his first case. Interesting, how about the strongest? Felix asked. While he had to struggle heavily to take down Ravager, it was understandable as he had a mere month to get accustomed to a new element, new fighting style, new environment and a new power system. But with 6 months to prepare? As long as he had enough resources and trained hard enough, he was bound to create an upset in this year's tournament. At least, this was what he believed until he heard Sekiro mention the strength of the current known strongest fighter in the Heavenly Plane. That's Nebula. She is an absolute freak of nature and believed to be the most talented fighter in the history of the realm, blessed with all the possible battle traits one needs to reach the apex. Sekiro mentioned with a solemn tone, she has been dominating the Heavenly Plains tournament for the past decade, winning 10 championships in a row and making the Northern Lights City surpass even the capital in terms of popularity. A 10 times winner. Felix frowned. How can the Ravager and the city lords even have their kind confidence in winning the tournament when they knew about such a monster? Well, each year people believe that Nebula is being pushed for retirement by the government due to her monopoly on the championship. All fighters are kinda putting their hopes on this each year. I don't know about Ravager, but I think he thought the same and now he will be in for a shock when he sees that she will be joining yet again. Pushing her for retirement? Miss Sanny sneered. Foolish dreams. The moment rules are set, the government won't change them unless there was a massive issue in them. In this instant, Nebula is dominating the tournament fair and square with her strength. The government doesn't give a sh*t about the fighters and the gambling den's woes. Felix nodded, thinking the same. The government wasn't in the business of entertainment but keeping the entire Heavenly Plains realm functional. So, they had no reason to force a retirement out of anyone just for the sake of improving the viewership or making the end prize more accessible to other fighters. The strong wins and the weak losses, this was the law of the jungle in the living world and in the spirit world. Ravager doesn't seem like someone with such a weak mindset, Felix uttered calmly. Having fought Ravager, Felix might not have shown it, but he had seen a familiar kind of rage, despair, and drive to win against him. A drive that far surpassed pride or a reward, which made him understand that he was in this for a totally different reason than he or any other fighter. He didn't know the reason and he honestly couldn't care less about it, but he understood that if his assumption was correct, Ravager was going to come back stronger than ever and make a name for himself. Whether he thought like that or not, it doesn't really matter against Nebula. Sekiro shook his head. I am sorry to say this, but I doubt it will be even possible for you to defeat her. For Sekiro to say this out loud even after seeing what he had demonstrated in the finals made Felix's heart skip a beat. What are her elements? He asked. Sekiro looked him dead in the eye and sighed. She is the only space/time elementalist to ever step in the heavenly plane. Felix remained speechless as he had to act stunned before them, but in reality, the news didn't really move him as much with his experience with those two elements. For me, mastering those two elements are 100 times easier than vibration as I have already studied them carefully. For this spirit to master them without a single memory about the living world, she really must be as talented as they make it. Felix thought. He didn't bash Nebula's achievements in the slightest, understanding that imagination might bring into life even time/space abilities, but unless one had a strong grasp on their laws and rules, not a single ability will manifest as imagined. In other words, Nebula had to actually study time/space's laws without anyone's assistance and reach a high level of understanding to the point she could wield them using her imagination. This was something only freaks would be able to achieve. Felix was in this category as the fact he was using a vibration element in a mere month was enough to set terrors in the entire heavenly plane if they ever knew that it wasn't a sound element. Space/time elementalist, I don't know about the rest, but if I want to defeat her, I need to reach a high level of understanding of vibration that will enable me to counter her. Felix knew that this was going to be his most complicated task in the next 6 months, but he was up for the task. The Great Filter stage will start in 2 weeks after all city tournaments end. Miss Sani suddenly turned off the TV and warned, if you want to participate in it, you better close a case first as I am not paying you to focus on tournaments. I think you should take a look at it. You cashed out rich from betting on me, everything that you have paid me has already been returned 2-folds. Felix replied nonchalantly, don't be so shameless and act like you aren't already benefiting from me. You little sh*t, what kind of servant talks like this to his master? Miss Sani got annoyed at how right he was. Tell me the case and I will finish it in less than a week. Felix uttered calmly, I need the other week to prepare for the filter stage. Aren't you a bit too cocky for a rookie? Kikiki, you think solving cases is as straightforward as your barbaric fights? Miss Sani laughed as he covered her mouth. Try me, Felix replied, his eyes as unbothered as ever. Fine, go solve this case, and if you managed to close it in a week, I will make an exception and give you 50% of the profits from it. Miss Sani continued chuckling as she forwarded Felix a holographic case file. I will take you on that. Felix opened the case file and read it carefully for a couple of minutes, with each page flipped. His gaze got colder and colder. His reaction was reasonable as the case revolved around a servant called Emmerich and one of the infamous shopkeepers in the city's bazaar, Sir Ezra Van. Emmerich had contacted Miss Sani privately and told her that he desired to sue his master for physical/mental abuse, fraud, and price manipulation. However, he couldn't generate any proof to validate his case and help him in a court of law. It was known that the court always sides with the accused since the moment they were found guilty, the punishment was almost always getting kicked out of the heavenly plane. So, the court takes such cases with great importance, and if one couldn't present a strong case, it would fall apart before the judge. Emmerich hired Miss Sani to find enough proof to free himself from the abuse, and the only reason he mentioned fraud and price manipulation was to help the case be stronger. "Are you sure you are up to the task?" Miss Sani uttered with a solemn tone. "I might have given you an incentive to work hard this week, but I don't want you to rush the case to prove your worth. If Emmerich's master ever found out about this, he is going to put him through a much tougher hell, and we won't be able to save him without proper evidence. Don't worry, he will be free to seek another master in a week," Felix assured before requesting, "I need to meet him first, so set up a date the next morning." "It doesn't work like that, cowboy." Miss Sani shook her head. "Since he is coming at us privately, we can't contact him at all. Just the fact he came to me for help took a great deal of bravery. So, you have to finish this without his help." As much as Miss Sani refused to admit it, working on such private cases was a great pain in the ass due to the limitation imposed on her. But business was business, and if she wanted to survive, she had to accept such cases to pay the bills. "You accepted this case 1 month ago, and this is all you have found?" Felix asked, his tone a bit too judgy as he opened the case file again and didn't find much useful intel on the shopkeeper. "First of all, I have 10 active cases as we speak, and this wasn't a preference at that moment." Miss Sani scoffed. "Secondly, my findings are decent, and I doubt you could have gotten them even after months of exclusive work on it." "We will see about that." Felix eyed Sekiro and ordered, "We will leave after dinner to check on the shop." "Sir, have you forgotten?" Sekiro sighed, "We are blacklisted, we should count ourselves lucky to set foot on his property." "Kiki, a week," he said. Miss Sani laughed at his irritated expression and walked back to her office, knowing that he was bound to come back to her with no results. As much as she wanted him to succeed, at the same time, she knew that he had to be humbled sooner than later. 1421 Sir. Azravan's Beast's Shop. After Felix's wounds were healed fully and he started to feel better again, he left the apartment with Sekiro and headed to the bazaar in the city's center. Due to Felix's fame from the tournament, he wore a hoodie and sunglasses to avoid any unnecessary attention. "What's the plan?" Sekiro asked. "We will spy on the shop from a distance and see if we can get some new information," Felix replied. "Okay." Sekiro was certain that his master's strategy wasn't going to bore any fruition due to the abusive masters always painting a saint personality on the outside, so, it would be near impossible to catch them in the act. But he also knew that their options were limited. Some time later, Felix and Sekiro could be sitting at a table with drinks in their hands and holographic screens, showing the daily news. The table was in a cafe that was in front of Lord Azravan's shop. "It sure is massive." Luminous signs started appearing in Felix's eyes as he gazed at the humongous shop behind the comfort of his sunglasses. The shop deserved such a reaction as its grandeur outshined the surrounding structures. It was massive for a reason, as Sir Azravan was famous across the entire heavenly plane to be one of the best spiritual beasts/creatures salesmen. Right now, the shop was attracting the attention of many pedestrians like it was a historical site, but in reality, they were stopping to appreciate the mystical beasts it housed. Its large, wooden double doors stood ever open, a testament to the relentless flow of customers, each searching for their unique companions in the spiritual realm. While Felix's vision was hindered by this many spirits and couldn't see the interior very well, he managed to steal glances once in a while. He was indeed fascinated by the visual symphony of exquisite cages, gleaming crystal tanks, and lush habitats, each arranged meticulously for the myriad creatures they host. From fire-breathing drakes and ethereal birds to celestial foxes and bioluminescent fae, each creature was a rare jewel in its own right. Sir Azravan's shop was not merely a store, but a living, breathing menagerie, where the rarest of spiritual beings could be found, admired, and procured. I can't get much from here, I have to enter. Felix thought as he analyzed his situation. The shop was too packed with clients and beasts, creating a bustling but noisy environment. He knew that it would be too tough to even see Emmerich, don't even mention his abusive master. With all those customers nearby, will he dare reject our entry at the door? Felix smiled coldly. What do you mean? Follow me. Sir. Sekiro paid the bill and chased after Felix quickly, knowing that he was a trouble magnet. The moment Felix reached the wide-open gate and tried to step inside the shop, all workers received a signal in their devices that made their attitude become unfriendly immediately. Even Sir Azravan received it. One moment please. Sir. Azravan requested with a polite smile and walked outside of his own office, leaving a golden-hued spirit and his servant sitting there. The moment he closed the door behind him, he glanced at his device with a glacial expression and saw the camera's feedback showing Felix and Sekiro walking inside the lobby of his shop through the crowd. When he received their identities through the system, he felt his heart skip a beat. *T. Why is this bastard here? He cursed, looking quite distressed. As per the rules of the Heavenly Plains realm, no one had any option to disguise themselves inside private properties to avoid unnecessary problems. So, even when Felix and Sekiro were hiding their faces, the system recognized them and forwarded all the public details about them to Sir Azravan. At the moment, Felix was considered a rock star in the city as he was representing everyone's hopes to bring back the honorable trophy home. In other words, the entire city should be supporting him, and if something was to go against him, there was a high chance of a public outrage. Sir Azravan was smart enough to realize this and understand that even though Felix was blacklisted and he must kick him off his shop to not offend the big dogs in the city, he felt his blood run cold at the thought of doing so, and Felix created a scene in his shop. I can't kick them without endangering my customers giving me a hard time. Right now, they are hiding their faces, so as long as I act blind, the higher UPS might not catch wind of this. Sir Azravan felt that this was the smartest decision to make at the moment, as it would ensure that his business wouldn't be affected. Treat the intruders like any other customer, but make them stay on the first floor. I don't want them affecting the important clients. He ordered all the staff in the shop. Unbeknownst to him, Felix and Sekiro weren't in his shop for a stroll or to buy anything, but for his sake. I think you should take a look at it. If he knew this, he would have kicked them outside right away. Why hasn't anyone come for us? Sekiro muttered as he looked at the staff members, who were ignoring their existence. As I said, they wouldn't dare. Felix sneered, my reputation is too high at the moment to afford to piss me off. Felix understood that Sir Azravan hadn't made it this far while being an idiot. So, he was certain that he wouldn't dare respect the big dog's wishes and risk his own shop's reputation taking a dive, especially, not today when Felix's victory was still fresh in everyone's minds and emotions were running high. Let's go to the upper floors, Felix ordered as he walked to the elevator, ignoring all the fascinating beasts and creatures around him. Unfortunately, his path was cut off by two staff members. One of them bowed and apologized, my apologies sir, but the elevator is designated only for VIP personnel. Is that so? Felix replied apathetically as he glanced behind the staff members and saw that plenty of customers were getting in the elevator. This made him understand that they were ordered to keep them in the lobby. But, he didn't want to make a scene and stab the decision, just like Sir Azravan didn't want trouble. Felix also wanted to lay low for the sake of the case. Getting information in this manner isn't going to work. His eyes must be on us right now. Felix frowned, feeling like two hateful pair of eyes were affixed on the back of his neck each second. This made him understand that even if he reached the highest floor or talked to his servants to get information from them, they would do nothing but give themselves and their case away, which wasn't going to please Miss Sani in the slightest. I understand. Felix nodded at the staff and walked away from the elevator, heading towards one of the most populated beasts on display. Thank goodness! Phew! The staff members sighed in relief at how smoothly the situation was solved and returned to their duties while still keeping an eye on those two troublemakers. Sir, what's next? Sekiro asked telepathically, a gift all spirits were capable of using due to their high spiritual prowess compared to the people in the living world. We have reached a dead end. Felix replied calmly, this might be really not as easy as I have imagined. Sekiro was left speechless at how easily Felix had given up. When he saw his reaction, Felix snickered. I haven't waved the white flag yet, I just realized that I need to better my preparation if I want to obtain legit evidence. With all the security involved, Felix understood he had to prepare some new unique methods if he wanted to breach them and get what needed. This wasn't a one-day job. For now, act like you are interested in the beasts and start asking for prices and such. Then, we will take our leave. Felix ordered. Okay. Just like that, both of them spent the next 10 minutes going from one beast to another, acting just like any other customer. When they didn't buy anything and decided to take their leave, Sir Azravan exhaled in relief. Good thing, they didn't buy anything. Now, it's easier to explain myself against the higher-up. Sir. Azravan returned to his polite smiley self and continued discussing a sale with a very important customer in his office. When the sale was about to be completed, Sir Azravan leaned to the side and called at the door, Emmerich, bring the Nightmare Cheetah's book. Knock knock. With two soft knocks on the door, Emmerich entered the office while holding a black book that had a dark gem engraved on its cover. It was emitting dark fog that encased the entire book and gave it a otherworldly sensation. Meanwhile, Emmerich was a lanky man marked by striking panda-like eyes, beneath which sat conspicuous dark circles, and a lively monkey tail that swayed rhythmically behind him, adding an unpredictable flair to his otherwise unassuming demeanor. Here it is, sir. He put it on the table gently and walked away with his back facing the door. Not an ounce of hatred or any negative emotion was seen on his face, but at the same time, he didn't seem like a positive person either. Haha, just its details book alone looks this extraordinary, as expected of the king of beasts, you sure take care of your products. The client didn't seem to care about Emmerich's demeanor as he was captured by the book's otherworldly appearance. After the door was getting closed, Emmerich heard only faint murmurs before everything went silent. Another victim falls prey to his greedy hands. He sighed in his mind, knowing that the client was going to get scammed out of his Loomis. This happened so many times in his presence, he stopped feeling sick and was just numb to the whole matter. Madam Sani, where are you? All he cared about was getting his freedom, and at this moment, he was starting to feel like he wasn't going to be getting it anytime soon. 1422 The brown-coated stalker. When Felix and Sekiro left the shop, they went back to their table in the cafe. However, the moment they sat their asses down, the boss came to them personally with an apologetic expression. I am so sorry guys, I have to request you to leave the cafe. He said with a soft tone so no one would hear him. How can that be? Sekiro replied with a displeased tone, didn't you just serve us? We aren't causing any trouble and our identities are hidden. Looks like it's not hidden enough, as I was just contacted by a member of the Red Fang organization, threatening me to cut off my supplies if I dare to serve you even a cup of water. The boss informed telepathically with a bitter smile, I really want to serve you as I am proud to have you represent our city, but I can't risk losing my business, I hope you understand. You don't have to say more, boss. Thank you for the earlier drinks. Felix stood up with an indifferent expression and gave him a slight polite nod before taking off with Sekiro on his back. This blacklist order sure is a pain in the ass, we can't even get a cup of decent coffee in the city. Sekiro sighed in frustration. Even when the kind businessmen wanted to show support to Felix by ignoring the blacklist order, it ended up coming at them and biting them in the ass. Felix had no interest in making someone lose his income over his own problems unless that person deserved it. You are thinking the wrong way. Felix said calmly, for the Red Fangs to know of our location so soon, they must have either sent someone to follow us or they have eyes across the entire city and even our disguise means nothing to them. Felix was more inclined to believe in the latter as he felt that his senses wouldn't betray him if someone had an ulterior motive against him and was nearby. Those bastards are really treating us as their mortal enemies to keep an eye on us for so long. Sekiro's gaze turned colder as his slits roamed around him, attempting to find the stalkers. Leave them be, let's go to the park. Felix was unbothered with his destination being known at the moment. So, he headed to the national park with Sekiro, and when they reached it, they sat under a tree and began planning to solve the case telepathically. The target has settled down in the park. Good job Oculin, keep an eye on him. Also, have you dealt with Sir Azravan? Yes boss, he promised us that the prick won't step foot in his shop even at the expense of his reputation. He better be if he still wants his beasts and creatures to be approved for sale faster than anyone else. While Felix and Sekiro were chilling in the park, a whole different conversation was being held between Boss Alves and his subordinate Oculin. Oculin was seen sitting on a public chair, acting like he was feeding the spiritual white pigeons, not even lifting his head in the direction of Felix. He was wearing a thick brown coat, making him resemble a mafia boss. Unbeknownst to everyone in the park, there were tens of eyes situated across his entire body, making him seem quite freakish. Felix had no idea that his senses had indeed failed him, as this man's race was quite unique, making him able to spy on anyone through his other eyes without leaving a hint. It was like putting cameras on someone, no one could sense its lifeless presence. As always, keep your eye on him from a distance and just report back to me. Boss Alves repeated. Understood. After the call was put down, Boss Alves turned his chair to face the window and gazed at the national park from the highest floor of his building. He has associated himself with that lunatic. Let's see if she dares be as bold when she realizes the identity of the noble after him and his servant. He sneered. Based on Sani's intel, Azravan leaves his shop only when there is a business that needs to be taken care of outside of the city. His house is on the highest floor of his shop and he doesn't go out to have fun or such. Felix had reached a decision to seek out Sir Azravan when he was outside of the shop to avoid his strict security. But, Sir Azravan wasn't an outdoor type of person, as he was focusing purely on his business, and if there was nothing related to it, he had no issues staying even months in his shop. It's been more than a month since he left the shop. Based on her intel, he always brings in new batches of beasts and creatures each month, and he goes to meet the hunters to personally oversee the process. Felix thought to himself, if I am lucky, he is bound to leave the shop in the next couple of days to handle the next shipment. I think you should take a look at it. At the moment, Felix's entire strategy depended on Sir Azravan's schedule. Whether Sir Azravan departed the shop this week or the next one, it wouldn't matter much to him, besides the fact he would lose a considerable amount of Loomis if he solved the case after a week went by. Sekiro, you will be tasked to keep an eye on Sir Azravan's shop 24/7 until he takes his leave. Felix ordered. Understood. Sekiro nodded. Even if Felix wanted to help out, he knew that there was a small chance of someone following him, and before he commit to the plan, he wanted to deal with this issue first. I will take my leave, keep a close eye on everyone in the park and see if someone tries to chase me, but don't make it too obvious. With that being said, Felix took his leave, heading in the direction of Miss Sani's bureau. Sekiro kept his head lowered under the straw hat, but his gleaming slits were scanning the entire area, seeking a peculiar movement from any spirit. When Felix had gotten out of his radar and disappeared through the streets, just as he wanted to give up, his eyes landed on a parked chair that was empty. Wasn't a brown-coated man sitting there, feeding the pigeons? Sekiro got suspicious, as he was the only one who disappeared the moment Felix disappeared from his vision. Since he had no other results to hand out, Sekiro informed Felix about the situation and let him deal with it. Then, he took off back to Sir Azravan's shop and started his own stakeout mission. A brown-coated man. Felix repeated to himself as he mixed himself amidst the busy street, his back straight, his head facing forward, but his eyes darted around him under the guise of his sunglasses. He was attempting to find a spirit that matched the description, but to no avail. If he is capable of following me without emitting an ounce of bad intent, he must be the real deal. For specialist stalkers like those, Felix knew exactly how to fish them out of the shadows. He reached a narrow alley and acted suspiciously by looking departed and right, then he headed inside and continued his walk. What do we have here? Oculin spotted what Felix did from a distance. From the reaction shown, he believed that Felix was either going to meet with someone shady or do something shady. Either way, he had to investigate it. Fearing losing his track, Oculin increased his speed and then entered the same alley. After a quick peek, when he saw no one in it, his steps grew bolder. I was really being followed without knowing it. Am I losing my touch? Unbeknownst to him, the moment he entered the alley, Felix had utilized an illusion ability to hide his presence completely and was standing against the wall with a cold expression. He watched as the brown-coated stalker walked right past him, his steps growing faster and faster until he exited the alley and entered the other busy street. When he walked past him, Felix had examined his entire body and managed to spot peculiar eyes peeking from tiny holes in his brown coat. Interesting, is he from an extinct race or a hidden one? I have never seen a race born with this many eyes across their bodies. Felix raised an eyebrow in surprise. No wonder I couldn't feel any intent from him, it must be due to them. Felix wasn't too knowledgeable about what he had just witnessed, but he believed more that the eyes were mystical than him losing his anti-surveillance skills. It's time to get on his detection again before he gets suspicious. Felix took off into the air and landed some distance from the stalker before effortlessly re-emerging from his camouflage like he was always there. Found you. Oculin took a second to spot Felix among the crowd. For a moment, I thought he has found out about me. This destination, he must be going back to that witch's office. Oculin sighed in relief and continued his chase, having no clue that Felix was allowing him to keep his job. The Red Fangs will always send someone to follow me, it's best to keep the one I know about and manipulate the situation to my advantage. Felix smiled coldly for a split second before his expression returned to normal. 1423 A risky plan. When Felix returned to Miss Sanny's bureau empty-handed, he didn't escape getting scorned and mocked for being overly cocky about something he had no clue about from his master. Felix remained quiet and listened to her tirade until she exhausted her breath. Then, he updated her on his new plan, his expression as serene as ever, like everything she had just said had entered an ear and exited from the other. Your thought process was in the right place, but don't you think I haven't also thought about it and already tried it? Miss Sanny shared with a mentoring tone. What happened? Felix asked. He brought up this matter because he knew that someone as smart as Miss Sanny would have definitely already tried to spy on Sir Azravan in his business runs. I got intel from my network that he is going for a meeting with his hunters outside of the city, so I tried to follow him. Miss Sanny shook her head. While I had no problem with keeping up with him without being found out, I haven't managed to obtain any kind of information due to them speaking telepathically. After the meeting was done, both sides went to their own ways and I was forced to retreat empty-handed. For Miss Sanny to manage to get so close to Sir Azravan and his people without being found out made Felix understand that she must have trained in the ways of shadows, darkness, or something in this regard. He didn't dive deeper into this subject, knowing that such skills and abilities must remain a secret. You haven't seen anything bizarre? Like a transaction, a deal, or something? Felix inquired. No, it was most likely a meeting for pure discussion as there weren't any beasts involved. Miss Sanny narrowed her eyes at him. I advise you to not follow him as there is a high chance you will get caught, and even if you didn't by some miracle, the telepathic conversation will make your efforts meaningless. Felix acted like he had listened to her, but in reality, he was already trying to figure out a method to get that evidence somehow in the meeting. He walked off in the middle of the conversation and entered her office, sitting in her bureau. He picked a small stress ball and began throwing it at the wall while his mind was working on full power. Did I really humble him or made him more arrogant? Miss Sani didn't know what to say about Felix's attitude, but when she noticed that he was taking this case seriously, she closed the door on him and left him to his own devices. I can easily use my illusion abilities to follow Ezra Van's team without being found out. As for the telepathic conversation, it can be handled with some mental play, making them believe that they are talking telepathically, but in reality, they will be talking in public. Then, I can film the whole thing with my crystal device, getting both sound and picture, a legit evidence that can help me with the case. Felix frowned as he slammed the ball on the wall. I still have misgivings about using abilities from my previous elements even if it wasn't in a public setting. I have no idea if Hades' eyes are always on me or not, and if I overdid it and he got suspicion, it won't end well. While Felix hadn't obtained illusion manipulation before his death, it didn't mean that he hadn't studied the element and its fields. After all, the illusion domain was too complex even for him, and he had to go all out in his studies to be able to use it to the best of his ability. This helped him be able to use some easy and simple illusion abilities here, though, he was worried that even simple abilities might end up getting him in trouble. Let's be smart about this. Hades has no interest in me at the moment since Asna has already shown him that she has given up on me while Elder Kraken was punished and kept his distance. Felix thought, right now, in his eyes, I must be like any other spirit and someone of his high status shouldn't have time to waste on observing me 24/7. When Felix thought about it like this, he understood that as long as he didn't do something so outlandish to attract Hades' attention, he should be safe to use such abilities for his detective work. Especially, when no one would know about them. After calculating the risks and benefits, Felix made a decision to go for his new plan. I have no plans staying in this realm forever. If I want to earn my early exit and attempt to help Asna at the same time, I can't be walking on eggshells. Felix narrowed his eyes coldly as he tightened his fist on the ball until, plop. Ka-thumb. What's that sound? Miss Sani burst through the door with a hardened expression after hearing the mini explosion. When her eyes landed on what remained of her stress ball and Felix's emotionless expression, her lips twitched in anger. I am sorry. It doesn't sound sincere with that face of yours. I am sincere. You owe me a new stress ball and you better never step inside my office again. Why so sorry? Get the F***ck out. Fine, I think you should take a look at it. Felix exited the office and watched the door close behind him without much of a reaction. He shrugged his shoulders and went to sit next to Kara, who was watching the TV. The moment he sat down, she passed over the remote to him and looked at him with pleading eyes, like she was begging him to give her a task. Getting bored? HM. Kara nodded her head rapidly. Felix threw the remote back to her and ordered, Here, research all the dangerous contestants from other cities and bring me their details at the end of the week. Okay. Kara began right away with her work, showing her zeal to assist Felix with anything he needed. Good girl. Felix patted her on the head for a moment before taking off into the roof to restart his training. At this moment, all he could do was prepare and wait for Sekiro's news. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like Sir Ezra Van had any plans this week as days went by in a jiffy and there was still no news. Just as Felix thought that he was about to lose the bet with Miss Sani, Sekiro reached out to him on the last day. Sir. The target is on the move. In which direction? South. He must be heading to the southern gate as he has a squad of 5 vehicles with him. Good job, you may rest, I will take it from here. Felix ordered as he took off from the roof while using the same invisibility ability. But sir. Don't make me repeat myself. Felix's tone got sterner. Understood. Sekiro caved in and stayed in his position. With Felix's current plan, bringing Sekiro with him would make things just harder and more complicated. He wasn't worried about Sekiro betraying him or sharing his abilities in public, but he just wanted to avoid explaining himself every time he used an ability. While Felix was speeding away, the brown-coated stalker was seen sitting in a cafe with his head lowered, seemingly reading from his crystal device. But in reality, his other eyes were like a radar planted in front of Miss Sani's office, and anyone leaving would be captured right away. If only he knew how foolish he looked right now. In the sprawling metropolis of Astralis City, the usual hum of activity paused momentarily as 5 sleek hovering vehicles, unified in design and imposing in demeanor, raced through the main thoroughfare, leaving a trail of gusty whines and awed spectators in their wake. Pedestrians stopped mid-stride, their eyes following the convoy, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled envy. The unmistakable emblem of Sir Azravan's shop gleamed on each vehicle's hood, a testament to the owner's prominence. As they approached the southern gate, the city guards stopped them even though they had recognized the convoy. It was a normal process to check on any leaving vehicle from the city, in case someone was smuggling something out or in. This gave Felix a chance to intercept their path with great difficulty after taking a shortcut through the air. If they took off through the fields at full speed, I won't be able to catch up to them. Felix had no clue about Sir Azravan's target at the moment, but he had no plans of letting this chance go by. He rapidly exited the city and waited near the gate. When the first vehicle was checked and allowed to exit, it waited outside for the rest of the convoy. Felix knew this would happen and neared the vehicle, hovering a couple of centimeters above the ground akin to a ghost. Then, he went under the vehicle and got hold of whatever he could while making sure to stay away from the back engines. Because he was invisible, even when the remaining vehicles were inspected and allowed access, no one managed to spot him. And so, Sir Azravan's motorcade took off to their target in a straight line formation, having absolutely no idea that an intruder was amidst them. 1424 filmed in 2.4K. I hope this beast's batch is going to yield us some new rare variation. Too many orders have to be covered and we haven't been getting lucky in the previous months. Sir Azravan complained telepathically as he sat alone at the back of the vehicle while having Emmerich drive him. I have a good feeling about today. Emmerich responded with a fake smile. When has your feeling ever been right? Sir Azravan kicked the driver's seat with an irritated expression, not too pleased with his servant's reply. Emmerich was too used to his sudden outburst and didn't react much, keeping his deadpan eyes on the road. But his thoughts were extremely dark. If only death was possible, I would have nosedived into the ground and took him with me. Such a reaction was understandable as Emmerich had spent more than a century with Sir Azravan and not a single week went by without him getting bullied, abused, cursed, and vented on by his master. It took him an entire century to gather some courage and report him to Miss Sani. Now, he felt like that was a bad decision as he kept worrying about Sir Azravan finding out. Unbeknownst to him, Miss Sani had recruited the best person to rescue him as he would stop at nothing until he solved the incident and get paid. Whoosh! 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 As the 5 vehicles sped by the farm fields, forests, rivers, mountains, towns, and such, Felix was getting more and more antsy about his situation. I can't remain invisible forever, how much distance is left? He frowned, sweat covering his entire body from the heat produced by the nearby jets. It's been more than half an hour now since he latched himself under the vehicle and his energy was being exhausted steadily. He could feel that he had merely 15 minutes or less before he pass out. This wasn't optimal at all since Felix wanted to save the rest of his energy for the detective work. He must be going to a different place, this wasn't part of the file. Felix assumed that Sir Azravan was going to the same business meeting, which was merely 10 to 15 minutes away from the city. So, he latched onto the first vehicle, thinking that there wouldn't be an issue with it. Now, his decision came biting him in the ass. But, Felix was never without options or solutions. I have to latch into the last vehicle to cancel my invisibility and leave only a senses blocker. Felix looked behind him at the 4 speeding vehicles in one line and then locked his eyes on the last one, which was hidden behind the rest. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy to make the transaction, but he had to go for it. After creating the best scenario to pull this off, Felix took a deep breath and then, he pushed himself away from the vehicle to avoid the jets. Fortunately, spirits could fly at command, making him able to stay near the vehicles instead of nose-diving into the ground. Still, the speed difference between them faked Felix to get swiftly passed on by the second and third vehicles before he could even balance himself. *T, no time to waste. Knowing that his window was closing in to latch into the last vehicle, Felix concentrated with great difficulty at the bottom of the last vehicle and then he used his most reliable ability from his previous life. Teleportation. In the blink of an eye, Felix found himself merely a few inches away from the bottom of the vehicle. Still, it wasn't over as his hands had yet to latch into anything, so Felix utilized his telekinesis to create an invisible chain and link himself with it. Phew! Only then did he get hold of the hot metallic tubes and cancelled his telekinesis chain and invisibility to save on energy. This entire sequence took less than 2 seconds to perform and the spirits inside the vehicle hadn't felt anything, which spoke volumes about Felix's smoothness. Now that Felix was at the last vehicle and without using his invisibility, the only thing he was still irritated about was the heat produced by the metallic tubes. Though to avoid having his palms burned to a crisp, he fulfilled them in chilling water and a thin telekinesis glove. Fortunately, Felix had made the right decision as Sir Azravan's convoy journey lasted an additional half an hour, going previous more than 3 main cities and countless towns and farms. This kind of distance left Felix perplexed and a bit doubtful about Sir Azravan's motive from this outing. I think you should take a look at it. Based on the Heavenly Plains map, the majority of the southern side is considered the spiritual beasts' kingdom. For them to be traveling for this long, this might not be any normal meeting with the hunters. Felix had studied the entire Heavenly Plains map and understood that it was split into 5 zones. The southern area was packed with dangerous unexplorable and inhabitable areas, where spiritual beasts and unique creatures consider their home. For one to begin hunting those spiritual beasts or explore those areas, they needed a permit from the government and it wasn't easy to obtain one in the slightest. As for the northern side, western, and eastern sides, they were populated areas with cities, towns, farms, and such, just like the center area where the capital was situated. Luckily for Felix, his struggle was coming to an end as the 5 vehicles finally began to slow down while approaching a small town that was in front of a mystical blue forest. The forest shimmered in ethereal blue hues, where every leaf, twig, and trunk radiated a luminescent glow, making the woods seem like a dreamscape plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Felix wasn't in the mood to admire it as he swiftly used his invisibility ability and detached himself from the vehicle. He flew down alone and landed on the roof of a wooden house, then watched as the vehicles began to park right on the main street like they own the place. I haven't received any notification that this town is the private property of anyone, so it must be an abandoned public town. Felix reasoned. Felix had to make sure that he wouldn't step inside any private area belonging to Sir Azravan since he would be notified about his intrusion. Soon, Sir Azravan and his people came down from the vehicles and walked toward the biggest building in the town. It resembled a massive horse stable. As they got inside, the gate closed behind them and all the guards brought in the convey were spread out around the premise of the stable, guarding it from all directions, even the roof was covered. Felix didn't seem too fazed about their protection as he floated in an easy-going manner towards the stable and went through a wall akin to a ghost without anyone detecting his presence. Interesting. The moment he looked inside, he was taken aback by the sight of rows upon rows of cages housing an array of spiritual beasts and creatures. Luminescent wings, multiple eyes, and ethereal auras contrasted starkly against the cold metal confines. Their innate grandeur was stifled, muzzles securely fastened around their snouts or beaks, ensuring that not even the faintest of growls, chirps, or whistles escaped. casting a heavy silence that belied the magic contained within. Felix had identified many of those beasts as they were considered pretty common in the beasts' kingdom. Non-winged devil bat, icy feathers eagle, black angora lion, this. They left him quite confused as he thought that with all this secrecy, protection, and long travel, Sir Azarvan would be hiding here the rarest types of beasts. Soon, he switched his vision to Sir Azarvan and Emmerich. They were standing in front of 3 red-hued spirits from different races, one was a blue ogre, one was a green goblin, and the last one seemed to be a normal human. It looked like the human was the boss as he was wearing a tight-fitting suit and was displaying an air of elegance. He was holding a brown suitcase in his right hand. Those can't be the hunters. Felix was certain as he could not feel an ounce of bloodlust from them. They must be already speaking telepathically. When Felix noticed the emotions appearing on their faces, he knew that he was missing the chance to pull off his plan. Without an ounce of hesitation, he got closer to them and noticed that the beasts seemed to have noticed them as they had grown antsy and more agitated. This had attracted Sir Azarvan and the others' attention, but when they noticed nothing there, they returned to their conversation, believing that it was nothing but one of their tantrum episodes. After there was a mere 5 meters between Felix and his targets, he extended his hand and released an invisible mist that went through their minds. A moment later, mouths began opening up as Sir Azarvan asked out loud without a change of expression, "How many fruits have you brought with you?" 11, you were lucky we managed to harvest an additional fruit. The human replied. A pleased smile appeared on Sir Azarvan as he praised, "This is why our partnership is solid, Mr. Zanir, you take care of me, and I take care of you." Of course, of course. An action. Unbeknownst to them, a camera was situated merely a few meters away from them and was capturing their faces and voices in 4K, a level of clarity even the dirt inside their pores was visible.